I've changed some small details here and used a throwaway because I don't want this to ever get traced back to me. When this took place, I was a female in my 20s and was finishing my degree in the city, working as a casual receptionist at a firm. One of the employees, Nick, told me one day that one of his clients, who he said was a stand-up guy, thought I was very cute and wanted to see if I would be okay to give him my number. We went to dinner and he was charming enough. He was in the medical field and was about 7 years older, but I didn't mind as my own parents had a similar age gap between them. We talked about my studies and he told me that he thought my rather run-of-the-mill family life was amazing because his life was so different. He was adopted as a baby and his father was abusive. When he was 15, his mother left and he never saw her again after that. He was kicked out at 18 and ended up in a terrible car accident in his early 20s. For a long time, he stayed at a relative's house and worked to support himself. Yeah, heavy conversation on the first date, but all I felt was this overwhelming compassion for this poor human who had been through so much. He seemed nice, was smart, handsome, and though he was just a touch too serious, given his life, I figured that was understandable. We ended up dating, but by about the third week, things started to feel a bit weird. He refused to introduce me to any of his friends because his last ex had left him for a friend. He also hated that I had male friends because of the same reason, and he would insist on reading any of the text I received or sent to them. I made excuses in my head for him like, people need to heal, or sometimes they need a crutch before they learn to trust again, or, well, it's not like I have anything to hide. He started being critical of the way I spoke or acted and dressed. He was also super insistent we moved in together, but I felt that it was way too soon. In arguments, sometimes, he would get a weird look in his eye, and that made me feel unsettled. And I once tried to break the tension by half joking, "You look like you want to hit me," to which he responded, "I wouldn't bother if it came to that, I would just kill you." I was so shocked I didn't even react to that until days later. Recounting it, red flags everywhere, but though it might have been hard to believe, I was actually convinced I was falling in love with him. Most of the time he was perfect, until he wasn't. But he would explain that was only because he had so many issues from his past, and I would believe him. Then one day, I told him what I thought was a funny story about a random guy in class who asked for my number. This guy had asked under the guise of getting notes for class he'd missed, but I only offered my college email address, explaining that I had a boyfriend. Hilariously, as soon as the class ended, I saw this guy annoyedly throwing the paper I wrote my email on in the bin on his way out of the lecture hall. I expected my boyfriend to laugh, but he ended up losing it. He accused me of leading the guy on, accused me of wanting to cheat. I was furious because I knew I had done nothing wrong. When he angrily threw a mug at the wall, which shattered, the whole argument came to an abrupt halt. I was scared and angry, so I grabbed my bag and bolted out of his apartment. I thought he would stop me, but he didn't. I went home and cried about it to my cousin, who I was living with, and assumed it was over. Days pass and I hear nothing from him, and within those days I started questioning everything. Suddenly, it was clear as day that this relationship was toxic and very unhealthy. Even if he did have a tough past, it wasn't my job to fix it, and it wasn't an excuse for the way he treated me. I was starting to accept that this was just a horrible near miss and get over it when he texted me again, groveling apologies and how much he missed me, and I made the mistake of responding. He called and I picked up, but it was because I wanted to tell him I still thought it wasn't going to work out. He cried, yelled at me, asked me how I could do this to him when I knew that everyone he loved in his life had abandoned him before, and how could I do the same? He told me he would never be able to love again and that it was all my fault. I had broken him. He told me that he had given me everything, but I was leaving over such a small argument. Then he apologized and told me he was trying to change and to give him another chance. I was bawling my eyes out. I felt like the worst human in the world, but I held tight to saying that it was best we moved on and that I was sorry. He ended the call by telling me that I had ruined his life. Nothing happened for a while, except for texts here and there where he would apologize, tell me he missed me, explain that he had realized that he made so many mistakes, etc., etc. I would tell my cousin about him, and she would firmly tell me not to respond. She was sure it would stop eventually. One day I finished my work as usual and headed to the station. It was a busy day and the streets were scattered with other people. As I walked, I had a weird urge to turn and look behind me, and when I did, I saw my ex. There was a little distance between me and him, but when I saw him, our eyes locked. He looked different, a bit out of it, and I thought maybe he was drunk. I decided that I would deal with him at the train station, as it was always crowded, and I wanted to talk to him only in a place where there were lots of people. I figured the yelling and crying would not be as intense that way. When I reached the station, I stopped and waited for him to catch up to me. He stopped about 2 feet away, and I expected him to start apologizing again. But he said nothing. He just stared at me. Awkward seconds pass and pass, and I said, "Look." But that's all I got out, because his arm moved slightly as he took his hand half out of his pocket, and I saw he was holding a very small knife. I froze and vaguely remembered thinking that I wanted to run, but it was like my brain and body shut down. I can only describe it as if there was a fog in my brain, and I just couldn't move for what felt like ages. I just stared at him, and I still remember how his eyes just looked so blank. I don't know how long that lasted, but then without saying anything, he turned and left. Nobody else had noticed. I remember numbly getting on the train. I started second-guessing that it even happened. Hindsight tells me I was in shock. As soon as I got home, though, I burst into tears. My cousin calmed me down and helped me call the police. In the end, the security cameras weren't placed in a spot that they could clearly show that he had a weapon, so the police couldn't do much. Thankfully, I didn't see my ex again. I ended up quitting my job, changing my number, and eventually moved away to another city. To my ex, let's never ever meet again. Actually, to the guy who asked for my number in class, thank you. You might have saved my life, and definitely changed it. Recently, I moved out of my apartment. I simply had to because I didn't feel safe with my landlords. I lived in this really nice Dumbo apartment in Brooklyn for a few months with my roommate, who paid for most of the rent since her parents are super rich. Our landlords were actually this seemingly really sweet couple who lived a few floors above with their kids. The first few weeks were somewhat normal, except for the fact that every time I saw their kids in the elevator, they would scream at me before they got off and then just run away. I thought it was funny and cute at first, but then their eldest son came to visit and started doing the same thing, and he looked to be about my age. I didn't really think much of it, since maybe he was just playing with his younger siblings. Shit got really weird when I bumped into all of them together and we talked for a bit. Out of nowhere, while we were having a pleasant conversation, the dad apologized to me, saying that his son might act strange because he's a I was pretty shocked with him just saying that out of the blue. I paused for a bit, and I can't really remember what I said, but I do remember just wanting to get the hell out of this conversation now. A few days later, I bump into the dad again in the elevator. I was pretty standoffish, and he was just talking about how great my apartment is and how much of a generous guy he is for giving it to us at such a low rate. Then he just asked if I could babysit his kids, as he and his wife and his eldest son would be at a dinner. I said no at first, but he counteroffered, saying he'd pay $150 an hour, and being the greedy idiot that I am, I agreed. This is where I fucked up. When I get to his place, I was speechless. His apartment wrapped around the entire floor of the building. It was the nicest apartment that I'll ever see, that's for sure. About an hour in, everything was normal. I was playing some fighting game with the kids when we suddenly heard the front door slam. I told them to stay there as I peeked to see what was going on, and I see the dad just falling all over the place, clearly drunk as fuck. He started walking toward me and at the last minute fell face first onto the couch. I must have popped a blood vessel trying to hold in my laughter. I asked if he was okay though, and walked over to assist him. He then turned around, looked at me, and said, "My wife will let us. Please." When I tried asking what he meant, his wife walked up to me, thanked me, paid me, and told me to come back another time. I just kinda went back to my apartment in shock, wondering what the fuck just happened, and I definitely wasn't going back. I told my roommate, and she told me that she also bumped into the dad, and he told her, quote, "My wife is cool, just so you know," with no explanation, and just left. At this point, we knew that we sure as hell were not going to renew our lease. We didn't see our landlords again until our final month. We kinda joked to our friends about how our landlords were creepy cucks. The next time I see them was actually with my boyfriend, who was well aware of what they were trying to do. It was an intensely awkward elevator ride, as when they saw us in there, they just went quiet and smiled and nodded at us repeatedly. As we step out of the elevator, the dad shouts "hey" to us and winks at me as the doors closed. After that, I asked my boyfriend to stay with us for the remainder of our lease, because at this point my roommate and I were freaked the fuck out. Our final and creepiest encounter was a few days before moving out. My roommate walked out of the apartment and both the landlords were sitting in front of the elevators waiting for us. She said that they started sobbing when they saw her and then begged us to stay. They apparently apologized for making us uncomfortable and said that they thought that we were the quote pretty young girls they were waiting for. She didn't say a word to them and got on the elevator and called me to warn me that they were outside, and then they started to knock. My boyfriend answered and said when the guy saw him, he asked if I was here. Of course, my boyfriend said no, but they tried walking in anyway. I walk out of my room saying I'll call the police if they don't leave, and they then beg me to not and run out of the apartment. A few days ago, we got a text from a random number saying we could live there for 6 months free if we just gave them a few nights. Of course, blocked and deleted. The whole thing was such an uncomfortable experience living there all those months, especially knowing they had the keys to our apartment. Hey Reddit, I'm a longtime user, but due to the nature of this situation, I decided to use a throwaway. Trigger warning for a baby death, abuse, stalking, etc. Also, apologies if this isn't the right sub. We just need some answers. My girlfriend's mother is a longtime heroin user and has been in and out of jail for my girlfriend's whole life. When she lived with her mother and her mother's husband, she witnessed physical abuse and drug activity. She was forced to move out at a very young age in order to stay alive. She thought her mother was finally clean when her mother announced her pregnancy. After getting over the initial shock, my girlfriend decided to be supportive of her mother since she thought she was clean. That was until her mother overdosed while pregnant. She decided to cut all contact at that point. My girlfriend is also a mandated reporter and last year reported her mother and her mother's husband to the state since she knew it wasn't a safe situation for the baby. The baby died in their house not even a month after birth due to an overdose with signs of physical abuse. My girlfriend's mother was arrested for the murder of her baby and other charges, as well as her husband that was arrested for child endangerment. At first, the judge did not grant either of them bail. Eventually, though, her husband was granted bail, in which he posted. We did not know this until recently, which helped us put some of the pieces together. My girlfriend and I like to sit outside her house in the car and just chat or listen to music. Recently, though, there have been black cars around my girlfriend's house. She also is frequently followed by black cars when she drives me home. It's the same couple of black cars that do this, and not just random ones. At first we thought we were just paranoid since everyone was still in jail, but when we found out that the husband was out of jail, we began to doubt our insanity. The first major thing happened after my girlfriend and I went out on a dinner date. We got home after dark and sat in her car for about 45 minutes before we noticed the same black car passing by us every few minutes. About 10 minutes after that, a different car drove towards us, flickering its high beams on when it got close enough for us to see who was inside. It swerved into the oncoming lane and I genuinely thought it was going to hit the passenger side of the car. It sped away and we ran inside. After that, we started noticing the black cars more and more. This past Wednesday morning, around 3 a.m.-ish, the same distinct black van that we had been seeing pulled up outside of my house. This was weird because my girlfriend and I live about 30 minutes from each other in 2 separate cities. A man got out of the van and shined a flashlight through my yard, almost scanning it. He shined the flashlight up the window I was sitting at and kept it there for a second. Then walked about 30 feet to an empty driveway and scanned around there for 20 seconds before getting into the van and peeling away. The windows were ice covered and frozen, so I couldn't make out the specifics of the van, but it was very strange. A few nights later, my girlfriend and I spent some time hanging out in the car when we spotted a black van hiding behind another parked car further up the street. We could only see one headlight, but it creeped by us as we sat in the car. My girlfriend lives between 2 dead-end streets. Think of a very blocky U. The van went up the first dead end 4 ways on, and sat for a few minutes before turning around and driving almost into the other lane of traffic to get close to us. It then went up the other dead end and stayed put. We thought it was very weird that the van didn't just back out of the first dead end, instead opting to drive all the way up the narrow street and turn around. After a few minutes, we called a friend and recount the story just to get an extra opinion. While my girlfriend was talking to our friend, I got out of the car to go for a cigarette and to see how far away the van was. I walked up the dead end that the van was on for about 15 feet before getting the worst gut feeling I've ever gotten. Across the street from me was a black mass, which was darker than the darkness around it. I decided to just turn around and rush my girlfriend into the house. Later that night, we heard a bang coming from downstairs, followed by what sounded like a boot. We locked the bedroom door, and I sat against the door with a baseball bat, hoping to barricade it. A few minutes later, we heard a car door slam before the sounds of tires squealing off and a car driving away. Our initial thought was maybe it had come from the TV, but we paused it, and the TV in the next room is never loud enough. When I went downstairs an hour later to get water, there was nothing damaged or missing. We theorized that maybe it was the sound of the front door trying to be opened, even though it was deadbolted. My girlfriend's exterior wall doesn't face the road, and we've never heard car sounds before. It is, however, next to a private driveway, and sometimes we'll hear her grandparents' car door close to the neighbors backing out. The next day, I was shoveling the sidewalks at my girlfriend's house, an activity that took about 20 minutes, and I saw the same black Chevy Silverado with mud streaks on the tailgate. It circled the block about 4 times. I was able to see the silhouette of a man driving through the passenger side window, and each time it was the same man and same truck. My girlfriend lives in a small town, and we're able to catalog the neighbors' cars. The black van and truck are abnormal. Our theory is that someone is trying to scare my girlfriend into not testifying, or flat out making sure neither of us have the ability to testify. We really just need more opinions. Are we just paranoid, or is this something that we should actually be worried about? Do you think these are just weird coincidences? Before I begin this story, I'd like to add that I'm a 26-year-old female, but at the time of the events, I was only 17. Back when I was in high school, this all took place in 2014, I met a girl who I'll call Carly. Carly was pretty. She had long red hair and friendly dark brown eyes, sort of like Bella Thorne. She always wore bright, happy, colorful clothing and lots of happy, earthy jewelry. She just looked like such a happy and bright person. She had a loud and outgoing, happy personality, too. Carly and I became friends. Everything was great in the beginning. She took me exploring to a bunch of abandoned houses in our town, and we took a bunch of selfies and pictures together, and she even let me stay the night at her house sometimes. Carly kissed me one day in her car. That led to us making out quite frequently after that. One day, she began taking videos of us making out on her Snapchat account. She told me she was going to send the videos to her ex-boyfriend, Michael. I thought this was random, but I didn't say anything. The next day at school, one of my friends, Allison, came up to me and was very upset. She told me Carly had sent videos of us making out to her boyfriend, Carson. She asked me why we would do such a thing. I was very confused and told her Carly told me she was sending those videos to an ex who lived in another state. Allison warned me and told me that Carly wasn't my friend. She said she wasn't anyone's friend. I didn't listen though and continued hanging out with Carly. I started dating one of Carly's guy friends who I'll call Garrett. She did not like this. One day I walked to Garrett's house and called Carly to say hi while doing so. She told me to be careful, but that she had to go. Garrett and I started walking around his neighborhood talking. Then next thing I know, Carly shows up out of nowhere with my ex in the back seat of her car. She was screaming at the top of her lungs that I didn't know what I wanted, and that I needed to get in her car so that she could take me home. Garrett tried telling her to leave, but she went ballistic and kept screaming. So we got in her car, and she dropped Garrett off and took me home, and was then acting all nice to me once I got in her car. She was telling me how much she loved me and how much I meant to her. I ended up staying the night with her that night. I remember becoming emotional in her room because I didn't like seeing my ex who I had recently broken up with before Garrett and I started dating. She climbed on top of me and started making out with me, and everything went black. I remember waking up the next morning and she took me home. Later that day, I had been admitted to a hospital because I was feeling unwell, reasons unrelated, so I was in the hospital for a few days. During this particular day, my boyfriend Garrett, my mom, and Carly had come to visit me. We were all visiting when Garrett kissed me. I didn't know this at the time, but my mom later told me that when Garrett kissed me, Carly had a very dark and evil look in her eyes as she stared at me. My mom said that look gave her goosebumps and chills that ran up her spine. She said Carly looked completely evil, like she wished I would just die. Shortly after, I was released from the hospital. A few days later, when I was back at school, Carly completely shunned me. She wouldn't look at me, she wouldn't talk to me, She completely acted as if I didn't even exist. I had no idea what I had done wrong from the time she visited me in the hospital to now. At school, she gave me a very cold and dark death glare. If looks could have killed, I would have dropped dead. I avoided her after that and had no clue what I had done. She just acted like she hated my guts completely. Garrett and I eventually broke up, and I got back with my ex, the one that was in Carly's car that day. Now, after I was first released from the hospital, I noticed this sticky stuff all over the screen of the outside of my bedroom window. I had no idea what it was or where it came from. I was waiting for my boyfriend to get off of work one night. I had gone up there to visit him, and he randomly handed me his phone, so I got bored and decided to go through it. I saw that he had been texting Carly. As I was going through their text, I saw that she had been sending him sexual photos of herself. During the time that I was in the hospital and Carly would come to visit me and act like my best friend, she was going behind my back and sleeping with my ex. And that sticky stuff on the window? There was a text to my boyfriend from Carly that said, quote, "Let's egg her house again. That was fun." I immediately started crying, and my boyfriend, of course, was trying to justify all of this, claiming that he had only hung out with Carly because he missed me, and that he was upset that I was dating Garrett. Carly never spoke to me again. When I tried to confront her as to why she would egg my house and get with my ex while pretending to be my best friend, she tried to pin it all on my boyfriend, claiming that he was after her and that she had rejected him. That summer, Carly told all of my close friends that I had committed suicide. She started telling everyone that she had, quote, loved me so much and that I, quote, fucked her over. But I'm telling you, that look in Carly's eyes, it was like looking into pure evil. It was horrifying. It was like seeing who she really was, and to this day it still freaks me out. Years after this, I had spoken to a girl who Carly and I went to school with, who I'll call Maddie. Maddie and Carly had become the best of friends after Carly dropped me. Maddie told me, "You're nothing like she described you," and "She made you out to be this really horrible person, but you're nothing like that." It turns out that the reason Maddie and Carly stopped being best friends is because Maddie told me that Carly got her to do cocaine with her one night at a hotel, and they had sex. She told me that Carly then left the hotel to find Maddie's crush. It was a guy she had been in love with for a while, and then had sex with him that night, dumped off Maddie, and began dating that guy. Maddie's words were, quote, "She's not at all who she pretends to be." She wasn't. Carly wore the happiest and brightest of clothing. On the outside looking in, she appeared like the most loving person ever, and she knew how to make you feel so special, like you were the only one that mattered. But there was a real evil inside of Carly, something terrifyingly wrong, something extremely dark and deranged that you could only see once you got close enough to her before she hurt you. I've never seen Carly since, and I really hope I never have to again. So to the girl who pulled me in and made me believe we were the best of friends, let's not meet. In June of this year, I moved out of my parents' apartment as I finally got a steady job and longed for some sort of freedom. I looked for apartments that were affordable in my city and found one that's a 2 or 3 minute walk from my parents' apartment. To me, it was perfect. I'd get to live alone and my parents would still be nearby so I could visit them whenever I wanted to, or pop in to have breakfast with them. The apartment itself is great. It's not really much to look at, but for a single male, it's more than enough. My apartment has a long corridor connecting each room together from the sides, with my front door being at the start of the corridor. My bedroom is the second room on the left, but since the walls are pretty thin, you can literally hear people in the apartment complex walking, talking, etc. from my bedroom, and any other room for that matter. Last week I came home from the pub after meeting with some friends. It wasn't really late, around 10:15 to 10:30ish, and I had the day off, so I took a shower and hopped into bed to watch Netflix. It was probably around midnight when I heard a faint knock coming from the front door. I stopped the show that I was watching and listened for a minute or so. I just thought it was my mind playing tricks on me. I continued watching Netflix when once again I heard a 2-motion knock on my door. I sat up from bed, went to the door and looked through the peephole, and sure enough, it was pitch black. I once again shrugged it off and went back to my room, but before I could even sit down properly, I heard a slightly louder knock knock. At this point, I thought it was one of my friends playing a prank on me, so I called my friend and asked if he was knocking on my door, and if it was him, it wasn't amusing. He paused for a second and said, "Dude, I'm at home. I have to be up at like 7:30. I believed him and hung up the phone. I was talking pretty loudly, so whoever was knocking probably heard me, and as soon as I hung up, I heard another knock. At this point, I was pretty pissed off, so I walked to the door looking through the peephole and saw nothing again. I then unlocked the door, took a peek, didn't see anything, and closed the door and locked it. Me being angry and a bit intoxicated, I decided to wait and catch whoever was knocking, so I spent a solid 10 minutes silently looking through the peephole before being a bit startled as someone put their hand over the peephole and knocked again. I immediately started unlocking the door and ran out to the apartment hall. I heard someone booking it down the steps and heard him supposedly lean against the wall as his jacket shrugged the wall. So I ran a few steps down before realizing that whoever this was waiting behind the corner to get the jump on me. I hurried back inside and called the cops. They were there within a few minutes and scanned the building and the street, but couldn't find anyone. They told me that it could just be some kids pulling a prank and to never run after someone. They kept a patrol car around the entire night, and the knocking stopped. It could have been some kids being dumb, but the part that gave me the fucking creeps was the fact that whoever it was ran down the stairs and stopped behind the corner. He didn't keep running. If it were some pranksters, I find it more likely that they would have just booked it outside. As I said, it's been a week and the knocking stopped. It kept me on edge for a few days because I just expected to be jumped by someone when walking into my apartment, but so far nothing has come of it. I've let it go at the moment and just hope that it won't happen again. Last December, I was visiting my family down in Florida, and we spent some time in Treasure Island. My brother and I took my dog down to the beach at about 2 a.m. to play some fetch, drink, and have a good time. If you walk along the water, you can reach a few restaurants, bars, and hotels lined along the beach. Out of nowhere, we see someone walking pretty quickly in our direction from over there, and a few moments later, we can make out that they're being followed. My dog is arguably pretty well trained. We work search and rescue, and I've never once had her run off without permission, and never once has she not instantly returned when called. But that changed that night. She was about 5 feet from me, and I saw her hackles shoot up and went to grab her collar, but she took off in a full sprint, making some truly terrifying barking and growling sounds. We obviously took off after her, and she reached the first person and stopped between them and the people behind them. She was barking and growling and lunging, and I finally caught up and put her on a leash. She's never reacted in that manner, so it was pretty scary. The group following her ended up being 3 men that were probably in their early 30s. They started booking it in the other direction. I turned around and the person being followed was a young woman around my age. We asked if she was okay, and she just broke down in tears and collapsed into my brother. My dog insisted that she get on the ground for some excited pup kisses and a soaking wet cuddle, which they both seemed to enjoy. She was far too overwhelmed to talk, so she got us into her phone and rang her friend's number to have us talk to her. We were able to figure out where she was staying and walk her back to her hotel where she met up with her friends, and we all exchanged numbers to talk at a later time. The next day we all got together where we learned she had gone out for a walk on the beach, stopped for a drink at a bar, drank a bit, and then soon wasn't feeling right. So she left the bar and noticed 3 men left after her. She had been walking for about a mile at that point, terrified and slowly getting more and more fucked up. She doesn't remember much about the night, and we knew she was probably on something, but we had no clue she had been drugged. We're still friends now, and we're all going to meet up for spring break when we're all back in Florida. I've never been more proud of my dog, and more grateful that we were in the right place at the right time. I hate thinking about what could have happened. To those 3 men, though, let's never meet. Almost a year ago, I was an opener at a resort, clocking in before 5 a.m. each day. The resort is located inside of an affluent neighborhood in a very wealthy town. Employees had to park in one of the 2 parking lots at either ends of the property, and I chose the lot that was adjacent to the long and windy road outside the resort, which led to the rest of the neighborhood. The road and the resort were separated by a short range of bush and trees that no one ever really walked through. I'd arrived one morning per usual and put the car into park with my headlights still on. The lights in the lot weren't ever on in the morning since no one else really showed up before 6 a.m. when the sun was out, so it was usually always dark at the start of my walk. Save for security, I was one of the first employees to arrive on the property each morning and was usually completely alone in this particular parking lot at this time. This morning didn't really seem any different. I had my hand literally at my keys, my brain in the process to turn off my car, when I noticed a young girl, maybe like 14 or 15 years old, come scampering through the span of the trees that separates the resort from the outside road. It's like her body language was the exact definition: run with quick light steps, especially through fear or excitement. She was now directly in front of my car, and my headlights illuminated a clear view of her in the pitch black. She looked like she was in high school and had long blonde hair. She was wearing a jacket with pajamas maybe, like she had just walked outside of a house. One thing about her that bothered me though was that she wouldn't stop laughing and smiling. I couldn't hear her laughing from outside of the car, but she was visually giggling at something I wasn't aware of or could see, and it was so unnatural. She occasionally glanced behind her as if someone else were there waiting away from the headlights. She then waved at me like it was a normal gesture at this time, and then immediately ran to my passenger side door. This all happened in the matter of seconds, and I wasn't really sure what was even happening besides my anxiety spiking. I know that I simultaneously yanked the aux cord from my phone to shut off whatever song had been playing, while also grabbing for the lock button. I remember feeling that panic for never remembering if it's up or down to lock when the girl began pulling violently and incessantly on the door handle on the passenger side. I realized because I didn't turn my car off, it stayed locked. She began pounding on the window, and I was screaming at the top of my lungs for her to leave before pressing on my horn. I could see her laughing outside like this was some type of game, as if I were a silly friend not letting her in as a joke. After a few seconds, she stopped the pounding and tried to open my car door. Her face fell flat like I disappointed her, and she started to walk away from my car back the way she came. She waved at me again before squeezing through the trees out of the view of my headlights. This whole encounter confused me as much as it did scare me. Most people I told the story just chalk it up to her being on drugs, but that narrative hasn't ever felt right to me despite her behavior. Maybe she was just being an extremely out-of-touch teenager whose parents need a firmer grip on her. My first thought was possibly human trafficking, but I'm not so sure that I would fit well in this scenario, as I'm not the most well-versed with the subject. I told someone when I made it to the LP, but they didn't seem to care that much. I didn't call the police, and I regret that. I'll never get out of my brain, though, how fucking off the feeling was watching a stranger, seemingly alone, pop out from the trees in the darkness laughing, and then try to violently enter your car in an empty parking lot. I do think that the possibility of someone else being present the whole time is a lot more scary, and I wonder who else was there, and where exactly. I usually get over creepy encounters fairly quickly, but this one was quite different from the rest. I go by the rule, be nice to everyone because you never know who could be a secret serial killer, and that's worked out well for me the majority of the time. Although this time, it was probably what got me into this situation. When I was 18, I worked as a lifeguard by a small pool. Nothing fancy, I was basically just a babysitter to all ages. When adults got bored looking after their kids, they sometimes sought me out for some reason to have a free therapy session. Mothers and fathers talking about their hardships. I know I worked as a lifeguard, but I can't save that kind of life. One day, a 50-year-old man with his 2 kids came to the pool. As many other people did, he went up to me and started talking. It started with some small talk, like how he didn't let his children eat ketchup because it has the same properties to remove even rust from metals. But as the hours went by, he started talking badly about one of his kids. How she was overweight, had anger issues, and was, quote, worried about boys when no one would ever look at her. I'm not gonna lie, that last statement made me go quiet, and I tried to somewhat reason with him to not speak like that about his daughter. He seemed to listen to what I had to say, so I was happy that I could possibly help his kid in some way. Having a parent like that would have given anyone a hard time. The next day he came back, extremely happy, telling me that I was, quote, so good with kids, because my talk had apparently helped him. He then began the day by trash-talking his ex-wife to oblivion, like how she had the most custody over their kids, and that the kids only ate fast food at her house. I didn't say much because I felt like it wasn't my place to speak, and I didn't want to create any unnecessary drama at the workplace. But what set the first red flag in motion was when the conversation suddenly shifted into him wanting a, quote, young wife. It was as if he tried to trash talk his ex to get me to understand that he was single, and that he was interested in a relationship with me. The days went by and he continued to visit the pool every day. To some extent, I had the feeling that he now came every day just to see me. I was fairly creeped out by this thought, so I tried to ignore it and just do my work. As the days passed, he started asking more and more personal questions like, "Where do you usually go grocery shopping?" And, "Is there a cafe close to where you live?" As I was fairly sure he was trying to figure out where I lived, I kindly deflected all of his questions with something very obscure. During my last work week, I had an afternoon shift. I asked my colleague who had the morning shift if anything had happened that day that I should be aware of. He told me that they had to ban a man from entering the pool area because he had reached behind the counter at the small pool shop where the workers keep their personal things. Apparently, he had been denied by my coworker to get a look at our work calendar, so he had tried to get a glance at it in a more illegal manner. That last week, I saw him twice at the end of my shifts, standing near the pool entrance. The second time I saw him there, I reported him to the pool security guards, and after that, I never saw him again. I have a bad habit of walking alone at night. I love it. I know it's not the best plan as a small woman, but it's one of those things that just gives me joy. Speaks to my soul, I guess, as cheesy as it sounds. I do carry pepper spray and keep my phone in my hand, but hell if I'll let fear ruin something I love. Summer nights are the best. The light lingers forever in the P&W. You get these endless twilights and there's this beautiful breath of coolness coming out from a dense green, even when it's hot in the daytime. I lived in the desert as a teenager, and I still just love the cool, silky feeling air here. Silly, but I do. Soaking up the night air is amazing. I live in a small town at the head of a very long rural trail. It winds through lowland marshy areas, dense woods, fields, and at night is silent and isolated. 99.9% of the time, nobody is out there in the night except me, bats, and the rare bicyclist. Once you get outside of the city limits about a mile, there's nobody to fuck with, so there's nobody looking to fuck with you, if you get my meaning. The only houses are sparse, and far across ravines and fields covered with blackberry cane, no streetlights, and no easy exit from the trail. I put one headphone in, and I walk for hours and miles. I usually take a big crossbody purse with a water, my ID, a little cash, and start to walk while the light leaves the sky. I only use my phone light when it gets pitch dark. This night, I was far out into the boonies. Just me and the maple trees kissing over the trail, and it was full on dark. Like really deep dark by then. And I'm cruising along, listening to a podcast in one ear with my little phone light. It's a beautiful night, and I'm just soaking it all in, and have been out for a few hours and heading back, but still some miles out. Suddenly, there's this extra pitch black, like a big splotch resolving itself out of the dense shadows across the trail. It took me a second to realize, oh yeah, that's not a trick of the light, it's actually something. It's a big black mass all across the trail in front of me, not moving, but it's blocking the trail. I start getting the creeps, chills. This is not normal, and it's between me and home. There's no other choice, so I slowly creep up to whatever it is. A black puddle? Then, as I get close, I see blood smears. Not a lot, but fuck, that's traces of blood on the paved trail. I put the big girl panties on and walk close, phone cued to 911. The shadow resolved itself into a dude in a big flappy black coat sprawled across the whole trail. He was surrounded by small bloodstains. So I say, "Hey man, are you okay?" And surprise, this guy sits up. He's sunburnt and grimy but coherent, and kind of chipper. He goes, "Oh, I'm okay. Just resting. Hey, you got any water?" I forked over my water bottle and told him to go ahead and keep it. He took it and thanked me. He'd scraped his bare foot and wandered around for a bit, deciding to take a breather, which was what the blood was from. I recognized him. He's a local meth head and drunk. He's either slightly drunk or kind of peaceful and belligerent on meth. Today, he was sobering up and tired. I asked him if I could call anyone, or 911 or whatever. Nope, he was just chilling. I carefully skirted around him and headed back home. I did not have any particularly warm or cozy feelings about him, having hosed his puke off of my porch a few times, and being called, the quote, see you next Tuesday word more than once by him, so I left it at that. Anyway, a few months later, he attacked a random tourist with a machete downtown in broad daylight. He sliced their leg open and went to prison. I grew up in a small Southern California town known for its orange groves from days gone by. All those groves have been replaced by housing developments and shopping centers now, but there were still quite a few around when I was growing up in the 90s. My friend Johnny and I used to get into all kinds of trouble back then. We were just general miscreants, but there was one time I truly believe we almost became victims of a child predator. If anyone reading this also grew up in the 90s, you know that it was a different era. We'd be out all times of the day and our parents would have no idea where we were. There were lots of kidnappings back then. I can remember multiple times that I was offered candy or asked by some creep to help him find his cat. I'd always say that I'd go check with my mom, and by the time she'd get outside ready to whoop some ass, he'd be gone. So anyway, Johnny and I were up to no good one day after school. We were trespassing around this orange grove that bordered his street. We started pulling these little metal things off the irrigation channels and tossing them around. All of a sudden we heard a sharp whistle and both of us looked up to see a man about 25 feet away from us wagging his fingers and going, But his reaction was not at all proportional to the property damage we were causing. He clearly didn't own or work in the grove because instead of screaming at us to stop, he had a grin from ear to ear. I can still see his face in my mind all these years later, and it still gives me chills. Johnny and I stood there for a second watching this guy. Then we look at each other and Johnny looked back towards the guy and shouted, "Run!" I look over and this guy is in an all-out sprint toward us. Despite the physical exertion he was putting into his sprint, the grin was still there. Johnny and I ran harder and faster than we ever had before. We made it out of the grove and back to his house before noticing the guy wasn't behind us anymore. We quickly forgot about it though, because Johnny's family had just gotten a Nintendo 64 and we started playing some Mario. I can't remember if it was the next day or week or whatever, but sometime after this happened, we were with his mom getting donuts, and we saw a wanted poster with a sketch of a man that looked awfully similar to the guy who chased us. He was wanted for trying to kidnap a boy outside of a school. Johnny and I looked at each other and seemingly telepathically agreed to never say a word. I don't know why we never spoke up. Maybe because we were at the age where we would have been relentlessly bullied by any homophobes because of the mere possibility that we could have been raped. But we never did speak of it again. As I'm typing this, I'm considering reaching out to him to see if he remembers it all, and if it aligns with my memory of the incident. There were so many different things that happened in my childhood in the 90s that could have easily ended with me dead. Somehow I'm still here and I have my own family now. I trust no one because of incidents like that. I always have my head on a swivel. Dude who may have been a child rapist that chased me and Johnny into the orange grove that day? Let's not meet. America Online was a big thing when I was 13, or in other words for my generation, AIM, which stood for, you guessed it, AOL Instant Messenger. It was around 2002, and I would have been a fresh 13-year-old in 8th grade. I had many times went into chat rooms by myself or with my friends just goofing around. Unfortunately, unsolicited photos were a thing then too, but usually you could stay clear of that kind of stuff by the chat room you entered. I didn't have any photos of myself, and this was back when you had to take a digital photo and upload it from your camera. Plus, I was 13 and really self-conscious, which I'm sure anyone can relate with. But one day, a guy popped up on my screen wanting to chat. It was fine at first. I was very naive back then, and we quickly fell into a pattern of talking. His name was Dave, and he lived in California. Eventually, it led to him telling me that he loved me, etc. But the problem was, he was 19. Now, I wasn't proud of this, but at first, being 13, I just sent photos of some random girl and said it was me. He instantly fell for me, telling me my age is just a number and how mature I was. Now at this point, he did not live, quote, in state, so there was never any chance of us meeting. Eventually though, he told me that he and his mom were moving up to a city that was about an hour and a half away from me. He started begging me to see him and go to a movie, anything. I had to break the catfishing truth and say those were not pictures of me, but of someone else. He was furious. He had been looking forward to a different type of child this whole time. Dave forgave me a few days later though, saying, quote, I still want to meet you because I love you. All the things you say to a young girl to get her to swoon. I think back now and I'm like, wow, I was 13. So I told my best friend everything I just explained above, and that I wanted her to go with me to meet him. There was a whole plan about him driving to see me and going to the movies to finally meet what I thought was the love of my life. I had been brainwashed into believing that this was normal. I didn't tell my mom, of course, and honestly, she didn't even notice any of it was going on to begin with. So, the day my friend and I were going to, quote, meet up with Dave, her mom came and picked us up from school. She said something that made my stomach drop into nothingness. She said, "Chrissy, you're not going to the movies. You're not going to meet that man. You're going to get seriously hurt or kidnapped, and I can't allow you guys to go." I cried and cried because I honestly thought I could handle anything and be just fine. She told me she wasn't going to tell my mom. I had to promise to never speak to him again and never plan to meet a stranger online. He ended up showing up and was upset that I wasn't there. He went on aim, flying off the handle like I hadn't seen at that age. It scared me. It scared me how close I was to this man being near me. I never talked to Dave again, but I easily believe I would have been kidnapped or worse that day if my best friend's mom hadn't stepped in. My mom would have been none the wiser, and I was none the wiser. But I'm here today, and I learned a dire lesson. About 3 years ago, I, a 21-year-old female, was a waitress during the height of COVID. It was my first ever job, and I remember being so excited to start as soon as possible. After all my training was finished and I got my certifications, I was put on the closing shift. We closed at 10 p.m. every night at the time, and typically it was just my cook, a 20-something-year-old male, and I. Rarely would there be another waitress with me, and I liked it that way. I always worked better alone, and I didn't really get along with most of the other waitresses anyway, so it was nice. I can remember that it was near the end of my time there that this experience happened, and I'm really happy I had the circumstance that I did at the time. I never could really trust my gut that much, because I had mild anxiety and couldn't tell if what I was feeling half the time was valid or not. I mention this because when it all went down, it felt real, and I had an absolute feeling. I had started my shift that evening around 3 p.m. I said goodbye to the last waitress, and I was on my own with the cook. Everything was pretty slow and normal until I got a call about one of the specialty items on the limited time menu we had. The food couldn't be ordered as takeout, and the lady over the phone really didn't take it well. After a little debating, she finally decided to sit in and eat instead. I'd say around 10 to 20 minutes later is when I spotted an older-looking car pull up and 3 people came out. 2 men and a woman who looked to be in their 30s to 40s. I could tell it was the same lady I spoke to over the phone, judging by her attitude coming in. I further confirmed this by asking, since I already had a pretty good idea of what she wanted to eat. What I thought was an act of mild embarrassment and pettiness was actually something much more sinister later on. Her attitude toward me changed when she saw me. She was much nicer and more cooperative. This didn't ring any bells at first because it was something that most people who wanted to look good in front of others would do. I set them at a booth and took their orders. I noticed that they had a red binder and a black pin. Remember this. I then went to tend to my other customers as there was a couple other tables I was waiting on. Once I brought out their food to them, they asked me if I knew any realtors. I actually found this to be normal, as this being the tourist vacation state that it is, it wasn't uncommon for outsiders to be looking for getaway homes. I would say this was reasonable for me to assume it was nothing, if they didn't already look like the unsavory type of people, if you get what I mean. Nonetheless, I gave them the phone number of a realtor I knew closely and well, since I often went to church with her. There wasn't any other notable interactions I really had, aside from occasional small talk if I wasn't doing anything or refilling their drinks. It was around 4:30 p.m. now, and they were the last of my tables to leave the restaurant. If any of you were in the food industry, you would know that as a server, you don't really get breaks, just a lunchtime most of the time, and sometimes not even that if it's super busy all day. So my cook and I took this as an opportunity to take a well-deserved break. We walked out behind them and had a small chat with them. I should mention by now that the front of the restaurant had a disabled ramp coming up to the doors. It was long because the building was on a raised foundation. This is important. Now, I didn't really notice this at the time, but one of the men took my cook to the other side of the ramp, down near the end, and was chatting with him over a cigarette. I was behind the railing at the top of the platform where the ramp plateaued. Luckily, the other man and the woman were on the other side of the railing about 5 feet below, but in front of me. We were having some small talk, and they started to ask me some personal questions, such as if I lived in the area, if I smoked weed, how old I was, etc. I hadn't quite learned yet that telling strangers such personal things wasn't a good idea. However, this, for some reason, was starting to raise some red flags. I gave very vague answers to all of her questions as best as I could. Unfortunately, they still persisted in trying to have some sort of communication with me outside of my work, whether or not I said no. I suppose when they finally realized that I wasn't going to give that information up, the woman finally got to her point. She had told me that she had a business offer for me. It was for a cleaning service. I don't like cleaning anyway, so regardless I would have said no. However, what she said next solidified my answer. She proceeded to tell me that she owned a maid service called the Pretty Kitties Maid Service. She said she needed pretty and young girls like me, that she had 10 girls now as it was, and she wanted to expand. She mentioned how they get paid $30K, she didn't specify the time length, and how it would be a great opportunity for me to help with her business. I instantly knew at that point that it certainly wasn't a maid service and I was in danger. However, I didn't understand just how much danger I was in. I politely declined her offer and told her I liked my job as it was, that I was satisfied working for my boss. She tried to further convince me by telling me how easy it was and reiterating how much I'd make under her supervision. She mentioned how she had a van for her business and described it to me. I can't exactly remember what she told me, but I do remember how she told me to follow her to her car. She said she'd show me a picture of her van in her car, but her phone was in her hands. I knew for certain I wasn't going anywhere with her or near that car. I declined yet again and said I was fine right where I was. I said that she could show me on her phone instead, but she was hesitant, after which she proceeded to end the conversation and left with the two men. A little shaken, I walked back into the restaurant with my cook and told him what I had just experienced. He joked about how I'd have good money if I went with them. Because I didn't take the situation as seriously as I should have, I laughed with him. At the end of the night, when the cook's grandmother came to pick us up, I mentioned the weird interaction to her. A panicked look came over her and she just sat there silent, staring at me. I got confused and asked her if everything was okay. That's when I learned the signs of human trafficking. She broke it to me that I was almost trafficked and I was incredibly lucky I didn't get kidnapped. My stomach dropped and I started to panic at the realization of just how much danger I was in. Nothing really happened after that, except for the red binder and the black pin I told you to remember. I went to work the next day and a customer walked in. Now normally in my part of town, not many people like to sit and relax for a while. They're mostly there to just eat and leave, as it wasn't exactly a cafe. Well, I get into my apron and sit this gentleman down. He was well dressed, not in a suit or tie, but just nicely dressed. He was alone too. I sat him at a single booth and took his order of one single coffee. He had a red binder and a black pin with him. I didn't even notice until my cook from the night before reminded me of it. I was so shocked at the fact, and it unsettled me even more, that he proceeded to sit there for 3 hours, watching me as I tended to my tables. I kept asking him if he needed anything else, and he asked me if people never just sat there and relaxed with coffee. I sort of shrugged and said, no, not here. Now, this might come as a surprise to some of you, but servers, believe it or not, do listen in on some of your conversations. I'm lucky I did with this one. I specifically remember him speaking over the phone about finances and how he needed to find another house. He spoke about moving money and how it was going to pay his girls that night. I ran to the back of the kitchen and told my cook. Thankfully, he came out with me to, quote, help deliver some plates in order to throw the guy off. It worked, I think. He ended up leaving not long after that, and I haven't seen or heard anything since. I'll tell you though, I've been much more on guard since then. I had a stalker for over 10 years. This happened in the late 90s. I, Catherine, and my friend Rose met him together. My stalker was a guy Rose and I met on a bus one day coming home from my volunteer work after school. We were on the bus going home, laughing and talking as normal, and this guy just randomly sits by us and starts talking. He tells us his name and we laugh, thinking he said his name was Gay. Yeah, stupid teenage girls. He corrected us and said his name was Jay. We talked a bit more and innocently gave him our names, and he asked for our number, but I said no. He was like 7 years older and kinda strange the more we talked to him. He got annoyed, but whatever, right? So we thought that was that. A few days, maybe a week later, me and my same friend run into Jay while switching buses downtown. I was going to her house like I did a few times a week when we run into him. He asked for me to hang out and watch him play hockey that night. I said no, I was going to my friend's. He got weirdly annoyed and kept trying and badgering me, telling me about how much fun it would be and trying to get me away from my friend. He really didn't want her to come to this hockey game either, just wanted it to be us, me and him. So weird. Our bus finally came and we got out of there fast. Over the next few weeks, I kept running into him downtown. It was like he knew my schedule, and every time I tried to be nice, but get away as fast as I could. And every time he would get annoyed because I wouldn't hang out. A few weeks pass, and I'm in school, and in walks Jay. I was so mad and frustrated that I snapped on him. Why was he here and how did he know what school I went to? Did he follow me on the city bus? He tried saying that he was there to see his friends, but he wasn't with anyone. Just like some 25-year-old guy wandering around a high school? I doubt it. After that, I would randomly see him on my bus, and he would always try to sit across from me and watch. He would still ask for us to hang out, and I would still say no. As time went on, he would still find me on the bus and sit across from me with who I guessed was his girlfriend, or some girl he was trying to make me jealous with. He would look at me while making out with her. He would do everything he could to make me feel uncomfortable. I would either turn up my music and do my best to ignore him, or move to another spot. Nothing ever seemed to deter him, though. He never did anything bad to call the police, but he knew it was wrong, and he knew it bothered me, and he knew I would have a panic attack, and I'm sure he got off on that. As the years went on, I would see less and less of him. He would randomly pop up and make me uncomfortable. He started standing really close to me and trying to talk. I would have a panic attack and do my best to ignore him. I would still walk away and would just get more pushy. Every time I would run into him, I would text my friend that was there when we first ran into him and get her to calm me down. It's now 2023, so 24-ish years since this all started, and I haven't seen him in at least maybe 8+ years, and I'm just praying that I never have to see him again. I'm 43 now, so he must be going on 50, but I'm still scared to run into him. I had thought that I had seen him a few times and panicked, but it ended up not being him. I just hope I never have to see him again. This happened a few years ago. It was pretty late, past 1:30 or 2 a.m. I was living with this boy who was pretty abusive, and he had gotten really jealous at this party we were at earlier that night. Not even an hour after we had gotten home, he tossed me out onto the front porch and locked the door behind me. I was knocking and pleading for him to please let me back inside. I was still wearing what I had worn to the party, and I was freezing out. I wasn't sure what to do. He had my phone, purse, and wallet in the house with him, so I just sat on the porch crying. When he turned off the lights both inside and outside of the house, I knew he wasn't going to let me back in. I felt so helpless and cold. I thought about knocking on a neighbor's door, though he didn't really have many, but I had anxiety about waking any of them up and causing trouble for my boyfriend. So instead, I decided I would try to walk to this gas station and motel that were nearby, so I could use their phone to try and call a girlfriend of mine to see if I could sleep over with her. Ironically enough, the road I was walking on was Donner Pass Road, so the freezing cold was fitting. But anyway, a little bit into the walk, this tall white pickup truck was approaching on the opposite side of the road that I was on. I tried my best not to make eye contact for obvious reasons, but then I heard the truck stopping and beginning to make a U-turn, and my heart just started pounding. I just about froze up, but forced myself to speed walk at the very least. The truck pulled up to me, and this guy rolled down the window and asked what I was doing out this late. I told him how I was going to meet a friend at the gas station, and that she was expecting me. He sort of smiled and offered me a ride. I said no thank you, citing that I shouldn't hitchhike. He then told me, well good, I don't pick up hitchhikers or anyone. You don't look like a hitchhiker though, you just look like you need some help. He just kept driving next to me and told me I shouldn't think he was a creep. He pulled out what looked like a police badge and told me he had just gotten off duty, which is why he was in civilian clothes and out so late. He said he wouldn't mind driving next to me just to make sure I get to where I was heading safely. I was naive and a bit too trusting of his kindness and credentials, and when he offered me a ride again, I said that it would be nice because the gas station wasn't that far away anyway. He popped the door open for me and I hopped in. The radio was low, it was a little messy, the ashtray was full of cigarettes. There were a lot of newspapers on the passenger floor, and as I was moving my feet, some of the papers shifted, showing a pair of handcuffs, some coffee cups, empty water bottles, rags, a highlight-colored bandana, and some other things. He apologized, saying that his truck looked like he was hunting, but it was super warm, so I was just happy and didn't mind at all. He told me his name was John. He then asked why I was scantily dressed without a jacket, and I started to tell him about the party and the fight I had been in with my boyfriend. He was super charming and attentive. He even laughed that he could go back and arrest him for me. I then asked about him, and he told me about his family. He was a young dad. He had a wife, a daughter, a son, and a dog, and I told him it was like he had the perfect little family, and he laughed and said he certainly did. Then, it sort of clicked for me that I asked if I could use his phone, but he said no because he had to save his battery. After just a little while, we were approaching the gas station, and he drove right past it. I politely said, "Oh, I think that's the one," but he didn't answer me. At that point, I felt sick to my stomach. My heart started pounding, I started getting choked up, and my eyes started tearing up as I looked outside the windows and watched the lights behind us getting further and further away. It was getting hard for me to even speak, but somehow I murmured, asking if he could please turn around, and he just ignored me. Whenever I looked at him, he just looked empty-eyed and emotionless, totally dead and glazed. I looked back out the window and down at the road to see if maybe we were getting slow enough that I could make a leap out of the car without seriously injuring myself. I remember always hearing in my head, never go to the second location, but I thought about the possibility of jumping out and breaking an ankle and how it would be a lot harder to get away with 1 foot as opposed to 2, debating with myself that there was snow on the ground, but then again, snow is hard to get along in, especially when you're not fully clothed. I feel so dumb now too, because I wasn't even tied up or anything. I was just so scared. Like there was nothing but trees, an empty road, and us. I was crying pretty badly at this point, and I asked if I could please borrow his phone again. I don't know why I even asked. He simply told me to stop talking. Then he started talking underneath his breath. Girls shouldn't be out so late. You shouldn't have been alone this late. Look what you're doing to me, dressed like a slut, and other derogatory things. As he kept saying these terrible things, I wasn't even responding. I was just crying and trying to think past the fear I was feeling. I then remember the pair of handcuffs I remember seeing under the papers beneath my feet, so I used the little scoopy motion to try and get my feet around them. I managed to use my feet to scoop up the handcuffs and my heels and toes to push them underneath the bottom of my seat as far as I could. I was thinking of different things I could try to do to help myself, like if we were close enough to some upcoming lights or structures, I could just grab the wheel and cause us to crash into them. Or maybe how if I got lucky enough for a cop to pass us, I could grab the wheel and swerve so he would appear to be a drunk driver and we'd possibly get pulled over. I guiltily thought about the possibility if this man is just having a weird night and how if I did anything it would hurt him. But again, I told myself that sort of thinking sort of got me into this mess to begin with. He pulled off-road where there were still woods on both sides of us. On his side, the wooded trees were closer to the road, and on mine, there was a small gap fully covered in thick before the trees thickly picked up maybe 10 to 16 feet away. He turned off the car and coldly said that there was something wrong with the car and to get out with him. As he grabbed the keys and was stepping out of the car, I grabbed onto the center console and cried and pleaded not to make me get out with him because it was too cold. He turned around to face me, his door still open, and shouted at me to get out of the car because we had to go check out the trunk bed hatch. I dug my fingernails deeper into the console, thinking my cries of no and head shaking would cause him to come around to my side of the car and drag me out himself. I was crying and said, "Please, John, I'm so cold and scared." I was thinking of everything I ever heard. Humanize yourself. Use first names. He simply stared at me in this way I can't even describe to this day. I don't even know how to start. He got back in the car and I slinked towards my window, scared he would drag me over the console. He turned off the headlights and everything just looked dark blue. He stared at the steering wheel for what felt like years before lighting a cigarette and looking out of his window and back at me and then back out his window. He heard me shuffle my feet on the newspapers. I was just adjusting my legs at this point, but while still staring out of his window, told me if I thought about running, he had a quick way to get me where he wanted me. And oddly enough, I was sort of thinking of running minutes before that, but reasoned that if he wanted me out of the car, then I should definitely stay in. Otherwise, he could chase me or shoot me. I'm glad I was right. I think at that point, I sort of hit some sort of bottom of my reverse, and instead of panic, there was numbness and exhaustion. There was still an occasional hot tear or two, but I just remember being numb. I've talked to a psychiatrist about this sort of feeling before, and he thinks it just comes from my ex-boyfriends giving me PTSD. It was dead quiet, but I finally just barely audibly told him that my friend was still waiting for me and asked about his wife and children. And he flatly said he didn't have a wife or children, and that his house was empty. I asked him what he was thinking about, and he said, "I'm thinking about what to do with you." He didn't say it angrily, he just said it flatly and coldly, which sort of scared me more. I did start getting worked up back to a cry, and at that point he told me not to cry and turned the car on, offering me some heat. I just cried and said I wanted to go home. Eventually, he started driving again, and kept driving until we were approaching a gas station. I was gauging the right time to reach to the wheel, but before I could, he started slowing down. While pulling up, he told me not to tell anyone or he would find me. Then he told me all he was doing was teaching me a lesson not to hitchhike with strangers. He was almost coming to a complete stop when he told me to get out of the car before he changes his mind. Before he could even get another look at me to assess my understanding, I was already down out of the truck and sprinting towards the gas station. The panic was overwhelming me, but then I stopped and I remembered to try to see his license plate. I turned around but only caught a blur of the last 3 numbers as he was driving off. I ran inside and asked the clerk behind the counter to please call the police. I waited until the officer got there, and I'll be honest, I was a little scared it would be John. My fears then melted away though when the new-faced policeman got there. I gave him the description of John, his appearance, the vehicle color and type, the parts of the license plate number I had caught, and the fact that he said he was an off-duty cop. Just basically anything I could. I asked him if he could look at the camera, and the officer disappeared in the back for a little bit, but then came back out saying there was nothing on them. I asked if I was able to look, and the officer said no, and asked me if I didn't trust him, and told him of course I did. The officer gave me a ride to my friend's, lecturing me for hitchhiking, consisting of him repeatedly asking me if I knew who Ted Bundy was. Of course I knew. I was just naive to think it could ever happen to me, and I was desperate for some warmth. I never heard anything back about the report that was made. They never came back to me aside from this one time I was told my case number didn't exist, but that didn't stop me from trying to follow up. Throughout the coming months and years, I asked my friend, the one whose house I ended up sleeping over at that night, if she had ever heard of any like weirdness or anything since that incident had happened to her or anyone up there, and she always says no. So I sort of let it go and tried to tell myself that maybe he actually was just trying to teach me a lesson or something. I mean, I definitely never hitchhiked again, so if it was a lesson, it certainly worked. I never heard anything back having to do with the case, and I never heard of any odd experiences up there again. Maybe it was just one man trying to teach me something. But honestly, sometimes I think I tell myself all of that to help me sleep better at night. It all felt really real. Even if it wasn't real, I'm really glad I didn't get out of the car in the woods that night. I moved in with my elderly grandmother a few months ago because I got a new job down the street from her house, and she said she'd be happy for me to stay with her. Some context. I used to come visit my grandmother about 1 weekend a month. About a year ago, while I was visiting, one of her neighbors a couple houses down came to talk to us while we were sitting on the front porch. She informed us that the adult son of the man who lived across the street from them was mentally ill and a peeping Tom. Supposedly, he would come stand in this neighbor's yard and just stare into her windows. She got her husband to come yell at him, and when he kept doing it, they eventually called the cops. My grandmother remarked that she had seen the cops at this man's house for years, and that supposedly a single dad lived there with this adult son who struggled to manage his mental problems. Flash forward to a couple weeks ago. Now living with my grandmother full time, I got home after dark a couple weeks ago, and the front door was cracked open. My grandmother is a bit of a safety freak, so she always had her doors locked. I was nervous, but tried to hope for the best, thinking my grandmother had forgotten to close the door on the way in with groceries or something. I go to her room, and she said that she was certain that she locked the door. I tried not to worry about it though, since nothing had been moved or stolen. The next day when I got home, her car door was cracked open. At this point, I assumed both instances were just her and she was being forgetful. However, she's never left either of these things open before. Well, tonight, my grandmother and I go out for dinner, and therefore I'm the one who locked the front door on the way out. She has a doorknob lock and a deadbolt lock above it. I distinctly remember struggling to lock that deadbolt. They both use the same key. Sometimes you have to shimmy the door to get the deadbolt to lock, but I finally got sick of trying and just left it unlocked. I was satisfied with the doorknob being locked. Funnily enough, as I walked away from the door, I thought to myself, I hope no one breaks in. Well, we get back from dinner and I go to unlock the doorknob, and to my surprise, the door wouldn't open because the deadbolt had somehow been locked. It was in that moment, I immediately knew someone had been in the house while we were gone, and locked the deadbolt back when they left. Once again, nothing had been moved or stolen. The creepiest part is that that person is intentionally leaving the doors open and locking back locks that had not been locked on purpose just to creep us out. And he was obviously watching us to see when we left tonight. I feel certain that this is the mentally ill man who must have gotten hold of a key that my grandmother hid under a mat or something. Why would anyone else do this? If it was a robber, they would have taken something. It reminds me of the first season of American Horror Story, where Jessica Lange's autistic daughter would just randomly sneak into Connie Britton's house. I'm just hoping that if it is that guy from down the street, he's as harmless as the AHS character. I'm going to get the locks changed as soon as possible and install a Ring doorbell camera. What I'm most nervous about is that once I get the locks changed, this guy, or whoever it is, will know we're onto them and may get mad because they won't have access with their twisted pastime anymore. We live in a gun-friendly state. We don't actually own any, but I'm afraid of what this guy may do in retaliation. The neighbor who had the Peeping Tom incident literally called the cops on him, and she's still alive, so I just hope he leaves us alone and doesn't bother us anymore. I was always an extremely small and sickly child. I looked young for my age, and my family and I lived out of town about 8 miles out, and our little community was next to a highway. The school bus would drop me off 2 blocks away from home. One day, I noticed a red truck following slowly behind me. So slow that I figured that they were just looking for a house or something. I ignored it and walked to the end of my house. That was the end of that. Consistently, this truck would follow slowly behind me. After a couple days of this, I walked into my house. I was always the first one home, and I looked out the window. Inside was an older man and a black lab. He was staring at me, idling inside his truck. Then he just pulled away. I decided enough was enough. I told my parents. Of course, my sister was quick to jump in that I was lying, but my mom thankfully believed me. She drove me to the bus stop the next morning. The red truck was there, across the street at a gas station, pointing toward the bus. I got on the bus and my mom decided to drive around the truck. She described the scene. The man was disheveled and dirty, hunched over in his seat just staring at the bus. His license plates were caked in mud, so she couldn't make them out though. It freaked her out so much she called the police and the school. I went to school and was quickly pulled into the office. The man had been spotted at the school, waiting in his truck. That day I rode the bus home, and this time the truck was parked alongside the street. I would have to walk past this man's driver's side door to get home. I debated, considering running for it. Apparently this man was getting desperate now that he was spotted. A police car showed up and I talked to the policeman. Then they went to go talk to the man themselves. He quickly pulled away from the curb and took off down the highway. I never saw him again, and I don't believe he was ever caught. Because of this experience, I'm extremely guarded and paranoid with my own daughter, and soon her sibling as well. The world is a terrifying place these days, and children go missing so easily. I don't like to think about if I had been grabbed. I wouldn't be here typing this probably. My kids wouldn't exist. I was lucky. Many children aren't. So, stranger with ill intentions, let's not meet. This story kind of creeped me out. It happened about 9 years ago and sometimes comes to my mind. So I was on an adult dating site, one of the fetish types. I know, don't judge me, I was just looking for some fun. Anyway, I was stupid and gave out more information than I should have. I was chatting with a guy, and he asked me at some point what I did for work. At the time I was working at McDonald's, so I told him. He asked which one, and I stupidly told him which one. I also stupidly gave him my phone number at some point. We chatted off and on, and we hadn't been chatting for too long. He would talk to me about how he wanted to meet me on break and have some fun. I told him no thanks. I don't bring my lifestyle to my job. Anyway, so I checked my messages just before I was due to clock out of work. Luckily I did. He mentioned that he was at my job and told me what he ordered. I think it was a Big Mac meal. I was like, okay, well, don't expect me to do anything with you. I'm not interested. He then got upset and wasn't accepting that I wasn't interested. I was also scared because I had sent him a face picture of myself, but I had never received one from him. I really wasn't too interested in him, so I decided I didn't need a face picture since I wasn't likely going to meet up with him. His interests weren't what I was looking for, and I have a hard time straight up saying I'm not interested, just slowly started to ghost whoever I had no interest in. Now luckily, I hadn't told him my work schedule, so he didn't know I was about to clock out. So after I was finished at work, I told one of my managers that I was on a dating site and some guy just showed up to my work and I have no idea what he looks like and that I was going to hang out in the back of the break room for a bit. Luckily, she didn't judge me and was just like, oh, okay. So I waited for about half an hour before I left. I didn't have a car at the time and had to walk home and was afraid he would see me and try to pick me up in his car. Luckily, no one followed me, so I was in the clear. So, creepy guy, let's never meet. I don't think he ever messaged me again, or I ended up blocking him or something. I don't really know if it's all that creepy, but it does creep me out that some random person just decided that he would show up at my job and expect me to want to meet up with him. So yeah, now I just give vague responses as to where I work now. I don't work in the same town I live in, so it would be hard to pinpoint my exact location. This opened my eyes and made me more aware of the information I give out to strangers. I lived in a small suburbanish area of a small town. My house was very close to my grandparents' house. My house was on one block, a large church with a large parking lot was the entirety of the next block, and then the block of my grandparents' house. My grandparents were both retired, and so every day during the summer while our parents were at work, a few of my cousins and I would spend the day at my grandparents'. Honestly, it was such a fun childhood to have. When I was around 11, my parents bought us a dog. One of my chores during the summer was to walk over to my house and let the dog out to use the bathroom, and then walk back to my grandparents'. One of my cousins who was a year older than me would always go with me too. Well, one day we were on our way back to my grandparents, and a guy drove up next to us. In one quick motion, he opened his car door and yelled, "Gotcha!" At that moment, my cousin and I just took off running. He quickly shut his door and sped ahead of us into the parking lot of the church. Instead of running through the parking lot, my cousin and I ran behind the church, but continued in the direction of my grandparents'. When we emerged from the backside of the church, the guy was still in the parking lot, his head on a swivel looking for us. We continued to run. A few heartbeats later, he spotted us, and we heard his tires squeal again after us. Thankfully, we were very close to my grandparents and quickly made it inside. We ran in and told my grandmother, who of course didn't believe us, and told us to go back outside and play. So, we did as we were told, and my cousin and I did go back outside. Still spooked, neither of us felt like playing and just sat on the front porch. Soon, the guy drove back and slowed down as he passed. We ran back in and told my grandmother, who again didn't believe us and told us to go back outside. Well, the third time of us coming in and interrupting her soap opera, she finally came out on the porch, and at the same time the guy passed by again. She called the police, and while we were talking with the police officer, the guy drove by again and we pointed him out. But the police officer just took our statements and left. We never saw that guy again. I would like to think that the police officer pulled him over and scared him into not bothering us or anyone else again, but I highly doubt it. I have this friend, I'll just use his first letter, R, who I believe has been stalking me for the past 2 weeks, if not longer. I'll give some background info, then get into the problem I'm in. Thanks in advance for any advice and help. We met back in 2014 in high school. He was always quiet, but was a nice and easygoing guy. We grew very close and I saw him as a brother. He didn't have a very smooth childhood. He saw his parents argue a lot, often for years, and his mom even cheated on his dad, and he saw the effect it had on him and the whole family. But you wouldn't suspect anything out of the ordinary just meeting him at first. Around 2016, he started to become a bit paranoid and would seem a bit pessimistic at times. He never had many friends, but neither did I for that matter. We had 2 other friends together that we saw often, and we were the only ones that he trusted. I saw him have this strange panic attack where he ran out of a restaurant we were at, and he ran to a nearby park and yelled at people. I called his dad to come get him, and he got him in the car and gave him a pill. Apparently, this had been the second time this happened recently then. Fast forward to June 2021. In between that last episode and now, ours seemed normal as could be, but I noticed he was a bit off and has been since then. He met a girl in college months before that he says he fell madly in love with, but she rejected him when he asked her on a date and blocked him on everything right after graduation. It took a massive toll on his emotional and mental state. He had another episode where he ran outside his house and actually provoked someone, and they punched him in self-defense, and then his parents took him to the hospital during that summer, and he was officially diagnosed with schizophrenia. So, from late 2021 until now, I've noticed he's quieter. He still cracks jokes and you can have a decent conversation with him, and he still seems like a nice guy. But there's some stuff recently that I truly think is alarming, and this is why I'm making this post. So, I'll cut to the chase. For the last 6 weeks we've hung out 3 times. This was actually after a hiatus where we didn't see each other since February this year, because I started working more hours and went to the night shift. Each of those 3 hangouts I've noticed he looks at me in a really strange way. Like he's horny and imagining me naked, or imagining himself hurting me. We're both male, heterosexual, and I'm saying this to preface for what I'll mention in a bit. He also mentions that he's still in love with that girl from school, but then proceeds to call her a slut, a whore, and wants to rape and kill her right after. He has said this numerous times and even mentions going to the elementary school that she goes to. He sent me a picture of that school on Google Maps with arrows pointed at it and firework emojis last week. He also admitted to having parked outside of her home and sitting there for hours about 5 times back in 2021. For the past week, he's been insisting on hanging out several times a day, and when I was at Chippies with my parents on Saturday, he sent me a message saying, quote, "Chili's." He's able to see me since I'm on the Snap Map on Snapchat, since I use the app often to talk to other friends. When I went to the mall right after, he said, quote, "You're going to the mall again? You went there yesterday." Which is true. I went to the mall twice, once with my mom, and then with both of my parents the day later to get some stuff since one of our favorite stores was closing, so we wanted to check out the good deals. On the drive home that day, he messaged me saying, "You didn't work today, we should have hung out." I replied, "Maybe Wednesday," which was actually yesterday since writing this post. I didn't see him because I'm genuinely creeped out. So the day after that, on Sunday, he again insisted on seeing me, but I went to go play some soccer instead with other friends, and then I went to go do some laundry after that. And when I was at the laundromat, he sent me a soccer ball emoji and a laundry emoji indicating he saw me on the Snap Map. Here's the thing, he keeps mentioning where I am, and it's always within 10 minutes of me being on my phone. He's actually done this for the last 2 years, but never this frequently. It used to be like twice a month and I brushed it off, but now I'm noticing something actually concerning. He's also been calling me, quote, "boyfriend," and sending heart emojis the past week, and when I told him that I was going to see him this week, which I won't, but I said so just to not make him mad because I'm actually fearful of him hurting me or others, he said, "You think I can wait that long to see my boyfriend?" This past Sunday I didn't reply to him for 4 hours and he kept asking me if I'm mad, and then said he wants me to reply no longer than a minute after he texts me each time. I have a feeling that he's just consistently on his phone looking for when I'm active on social media, and I don't really know why. He also admitted to me a month ago that he makes fake profiles to be able to gain access to that one girl's Instagram and look at her pictures, and he says that he masturbates to them. He even uses those nudity apps to take her clothes off. All of this is concerning. He currently doesn't have a job and hasn't had one for the last 2 years. I'm the only friend he sees and talks to, and I feel like he's developed a compulsion or fixation or dependence or a mix of all 3 on me. And as I mentioned, he has said that he wants to rape and kill that girl that used to be in his class, and he knows where she lives and knows where she works. I have not mentioned my thoughts on this to him again out of fear. He currently takes medication daily, and he said that he's been seeing a new therapist for just over a month now, but I don't know if any of those things are even working or true. I'm asking for any advice on how to approach this and what to do. My concern is that if I tell anyone like the police or the girl, he'll find out and retaliate by hurting me or my family, as he knows where I live. Any help on this is appreciated. My story starts in 2014, when I was 10 years old. I had just made a Gmail account, and it made me feel really grown up and mature. I'm thankful I didn't pick something stupid for the address because I still use it to this day. With my Gmail account, I created a blog on which I posted book reviews and recommendations because I was kind of a nerd when I was younger. I gave all my classmates the link to my blog, and I knew every single person that engaged on it because their usernames were some variation of their real name. However, one day, I received a comment on a post I made from a username that I didn't recognize, Pinkie Pie. They left very normal comments on my posts, and I thought maybe it was one of my classmates with a different username. I didn't think too much of it. Then, about 2 years later, in 2016, I made a Roblox YouTube channel, which I have since deleted, otherwise I would have linked it here. Cringy, I know. I would record gameplay and post it onto my YouTube channel, and I gained a whopping 18 subscribers or something. But one of my subscribers, the only one that regularly commented on my videos, was called Pinkie Pie. This kind of freaked me out because I had made a completely new email for this channel and hadn't told anyone about it. Roblox used to be my guilty pleasure, so I kept my channel a secret. I kept on brushing off the Pinkie Pie appearances, commenting on my videos, my blog, my friends' YouTube channels, and even on my mom's Facebook, as coincidences until 2019. I was either 14 or 15 and had made my first Reddit account. This was when I was in my K-pop era. I was a regular on r/K-pop and made news-like posts about happenings in the K-pop world. One day I made a post on the subreddit as usual, and one of the comments was from a user named Pinkie Pie. The comment read, of course it's Koreaboo," with the clickbait headline, and nobody questioned it because it was a fairly normal comment and still stayed relevant to what my post was about. I clearly remember that feeling of losing my mind because this Pinkie Pie person had been showing up on every single social media account I ever created, ever since my first email account. I believe that I reported the Pinkie Pie account and deleted my own Reddit account. I still keep tabs on Pinkie Pie though, and I have the link to the post saved to this very day. Now, we jump to 2020, when I was 16 years old and the pandemic had just started. At this time I was kind of emo and angsty and insecure, as most people are at least once in their lives. I had not made a TikTok account even though it was all the rage because of literally one thing, the fear of Pinkie Pie finding me once again. It was at this time I discovered 4chan. 4chan's complete anonymity, and my strongest weapon, the Opera browser and its VPN, led me to believe that I was 100% safe and protected, even if I was on a website that was basically full of the devil's spawn. I posted normal things, sometimes explored the NSFW side of 4chan, and mostly just enjoyed talking to strangers on the internet. One day, I was feeling especially brave and horny, so I took 3 to 4 nudes of myself with a timestamp and posted one of them on /B. My post rose to the top because I had mentioned that I was Asian in the title, which I am, and obviously 4chan went crazy over that. I had lied about my real age and said that I was 18, when I was in fact still underage. I shouldn't have fucking done that. I don't even know what I was thinking. I remember receiving between 400 to 500 replies on my thread, and not all of them were nice. Still, I got a lot of compliments which really satisfied my ego and made me feel a little bit better about myself. Then, as I was lurking over my thread, refreshing every 2 seconds, I saw a comment from somebody named Pinkie Pie. It was another generic, humorous compliment, but this one did not make me feel admired or appreciated. It made me feel sick to my stomach. This was my breaking point. I remember bursting out into tears, deleting that thread immediately, and then going into a paranoid, delusional state. I deleted all of my social media accounts except my Gmail, powered off my phone, shut down my computer, and even disconnected the Wi-Fi. I honestly felt like I was going insane because no matter how much I tried to forget about this person, they showed up literally everywhere online. By that time, it had been around 6 years since Pinkie Pie first showed up. For a couple of years after that, I took a break from every type of social media entirely. I got rid of my Instagram, Snapchat, Reddit, YouTube, basically everything. If I wanted to go on a social media site, I would do it without signing in. This gave me a much needed break from Pinkie Pie. I never deleted my Gmail since I use it for everything. What's odd is that while Pinkie Pie has found me on every social media site I use, they have never once directly emailed me. I'm sure they do have my email, they've just chosen to not email me. Finally, we get to 2023, and to present times. Sometime in early January, I decided to make a Reddit account again and mostly just lurk. I posted/commented very little, and I received no comments from Pinkie Pie. I believed that the ordeal was finally over. In November, a few days after my 19th birthday, I went to Japan for my cousin's wedding. I decided to make a Reddit post on r/outfits of my wedding outfit because I really liked it and wanted people to see it. Guess who commented on it? Well, to be honest, I don't know who it was. By the time I read the comment, the account that had written it had already been deleted, but they wrote, "How is Japan? Liking it more than insert name of the city where I live, insert name of the state where I live." Once again, I was in hysterics. I was and still am 99% sure that this is Pinkie Pie. Somebody, even if it wasn't who I thought it was, had just fucking doxed me on the internet. I reported the comment, reported the user, and once again deleted my post and deleted my account. All I can do is run. I've made a throwaway account to share my story because I need to get it off my chest. I haven't told a single soul. I feel unsafe all the time and have paranoia-induced hallucinations occasionally, and I cannot explain to anyone why. I swear to the fucking gods, if Pinkie Pie comments on this. When I was 10, my parents and I went to visit my grandmother for spring break. My cousin also came to visit, and we decided we wanted to go to the YMCA for the day. My grandmother dropped us off, and she said she would come pick us up in about 4 hours. On that day, the YMCA was pretty empty. There were a couple of adults in the exercise room, but that's about it. We went to the basketball court, and after about 2 hours of playing tag and shooting baskets, we were bored. I've never been the biggest fan of swimming, but this YMCA had a pretty cool pool, so we changed into our bathing suits and headed in there. The pool was completely empty except for the lifeguard. We played a bunch of games and swam laps, but after about an hour, there wasn't much left to do, and there was no one except us to hang out with to keep things interesting. So we decided to play a game of seeing how long we could hold our breath underwater. We stood in the shallow end near the clock on the wall so we could time ourselves. Instead of fully submerging, we would just stick our heads face down into the water. We did this a couple of times and I was winning, and on our last round I felt a tap on my shoulder. I figured it was my cousin giving up and telling me that I had won. But instead, it was the lifeguard who told me to knock it off or she was going to have to ask us to leave the pool. Since we were tired of being in the pool anyway, we figured we would get out, get dressed, and go back to the basketball court until my grandmother came and picked us up. We only had an hour left anyway, and the water was freezing. As we got out though, the lifeguard stopped us. She asked if we wanted to go into the sauna to warm up and dry off first. The sign on the sauna said 18 years or older, so of course we were super excited that she allowed us to do that. She walked us to the sauna and unlocked the door. The door was glass and the interior was made entirely out of wood. Inside, above the door, there was a clock, probably to help make sure you were not in there for an unsafe amount of time. The lifeguard stand was adjacent to the sauna, but if you looked out the door, you could clearly see it. She followed us in and went over to the thermometer encased in plastic and unlocked it so she could crank up the heat. I figured that she must have to turn it on each time, so I didn't really think much of it. Both my cousins and I were very short girls, and so we couldn't see the temperature that was printed on the thermometer knob, but I know she was turning up the heat. Then she left and shut the door behind her. I thought I saw her lock the door too, but I thought to myself, why would she lock the door when we might want to get out? I checked the clock and decided we should get out in about 10 or 15 minutes. It was already pretty warm in the sauna, but now the room was blazing. It felt really nice because I was cold from the pool, but about after 15 minutes, it was starting to get a little bit too hot and my cousin agreed that we should just get out and leave and get dressed. I went to turn the knob on the door, but it wasn't budging. I thought maybe it was jammed, so I shook it, but it still wasn't opening, and then I let my cousin try. She couldn't get it open either. We figured the lifeguard would be back in a couple of minutes, so we just sat back down and waited. The room was now getting hotter, and I really wanted to leave. I got up and started banging on the door and shaking and twisting the knob, trying to get the lifeguard's attention. My cousin got up and joined me. We started screaming at the top of our lungs for her to let us out, but she just stared straight ahead. I don't think that there was any way that she couldn't have noticed or heard two little girls banging and kicking the door and screaming. Now we had been in there about 25 minutes. It was so hot in the sauna that it hurt to breathe. It felt like my lungs were on fire and my eyes and skin were burning. We sat back down to put our towels over our heads because they were still a little damp and it made it easier to breathe. I was so worried about my cousin, as she is a couple of years younger than me. I looked at the clock and I saw that we had been in there for 35 minutes now. I got up and walked to the door again and saw the lifeguard still just staring straight ahead. Again, I tried to get her attention by screaming that we wanted out and banging on the door as hard as I could, but still nothing. I was starting to get pretty dizzy, so I went to go sit back down, but the wooden seats of the sauna burned my skin. My towel was completely dry, so I put it underneath me to sit on. My hair was also dry, but I wrapped it around my face to cover my nose, and I squinted my eyes so that they didn't burn as bad, but I could still watch if anyone walked past the door. It helped a little bit. My cousin was laying face down with the towel over her head, not moving or saying anything, so I nudged her to make sure that she was okay. She was, but I could tell that we really needed to get out of there soon, because she seemed to be a bit disoriented. It had been 45 minutes now, and I was extremely nauseous. There was no way that the lifeguard would forget we were in there, and I thought she would have come back soon, but there was the little voice in my head telling me that maybe she purposely locked us in there. Finally, a man walked past the door toward the pool, but for some reason, I just couldn't get up. My whole body was on fire and I felt so dizzy. Luckily, this man wasn't going to the pool. He wanted to be let into the sauna and came back with the lifeguard. I saw them walking this way and I immediately jumped up to grab my cousin. I knew now that for sure she had locked us in there because she pulled out her keys to unlock the door and let the man in. I didn't want to take any chances of us being trapped in there any longer, so as the man was trying to walk in, I was trying to shove our way out. As we were going out, the lifeguard started trying to shut the door and push us back in with it. The man was clearly confused about what was going on and said, I think they want out. The lifeguard let out a sigh and opened the door fully, and we ran away as fast as we could into the changing room. We only had about 10 minutes now before my grandmother was supposed to come pick us up. We were both so shaken by what had just happened that we didn't say anything to each other as we got dressed or on the car ride home. When we finally got back to the house, my parents were making us dinner and I told them the story of what had just happened. They thought I must have been exaggerating and they didn't believe me. I truly think that this woman was trying to let us cook alive in there. The only bit of doubt that I have is what would have happened if we actually died. She obviously would have gotten the blame, but what was her endgame? I'm 21 now, but I think about this interaction all the time, and when I'm in small spaces or I get too warm, I still have panic attacks. No one truly believes this story, and I get it, it's pretty absurd. I'm not sure if I'm allowed to ask for opinions, but do you think that this could have been some crazy misunderstanding? Or do you think that she really just left us in there to die? And why? Okay, so bear with me. This happened when I was a kid and I double-checked the story with my family. So, this was in the mid-80s. I was about 7 at home with 2 of my older sisters, 8 and 11, and 2 cousins, 7 and 8-ish, all 5 girls. My sister, the 11-year-old, was in charge of babysitting us 4 younger girls. You have to picture what our house looked like to understand what happened. It was a 2-story box house with a flat roof and a small box front porch, also with a flat roof. I can't remember what we were doing, but we were all in the house. We kept hearing noises coming from the roof, like walking, and what sounded like rocks being dropped down the drain spouts. You know kids, we thought of a squirrel or something, but it kept happening. Then, my older sister said something about how maybe someone climbed the huge tree beside the house and got onto the roof. We all ended up being scared because of what she said, and we knew that there was some roof access point in the bedroom that I shared with one of my sisters. What if he could get inside? My oldest sister told my other sister and one of our cousins to walk across the street to the corner store, across an empty gravel parking lot, and on the way back, look up and if they could see someone on the roof. So the girls walk halfway across the parking lot and being curious kids turned around, looked up and saw a guy in one of those totally 80s guys crop top football jerseys. Think like Johnny Depp in A Nightmare on Elm Street. He was crouched down on the roof. The girls came running home freaking out and told my older sister about the guy. My older sister, now freaking out too, first went to the neighbor's house to use their deck to see if she could see on the roof, but she couldn't see anything. She came home and then called the police. It felt like it took them ages to show up. When they got there, I don't think they believed a word we said. They thought a bunch of little kids are making up this story for attention. One cop drove down the road, up a hill about a block away to see if they could see anything, but the way the roof was, you couldn't see a person if they were laying. Then the cops tell us kids that we had to go upstairs and check everywhere to see if we found anyone. 5 little girls from the ages 7 to 11 sent upstairs, scared shitless, crying to look for this man, knowing about the roof access, and all crying not wanting to go, but they said we had to. To this day, I remembered how scared I was. I remember looking, but how well do little kids look, right? The cops didn't listen to us, didn't check out the house, inside or out, and just left. We were so scared to be left home with the guy out there, who knows where. We didn't know if he was just laying down on the roof or jumped down or somehow got in and was hiding. My mom finally got home a few hours later and we told her what happened, and my mom explained to us that there was a lock on the roof access and no one could get in, but she checked anyways. Then went to check outside. There were clear footprints in the dirt, dug in good from him jumping off, onto the porch and off into the lower flower bed. Oh, my mom was so steaming mad when she realized we told the truth and weren't believed by the police. We went to the police station the next day and we were all separated and interviewed. We all told the same story. My mom went up on one side of the cops and down the other. We never found out who the guy was or why he was there. Did he know it was a house with 5 little girls home alone? Probably. I'm a 21-year-old female and I live with my grandparents in a large city on a busy road. I was just in bed when I heard the doorbell ring, and I was about to answer it, but my grandpa got to the door before me. I'm now so glad that he did. I couldn't see the front door from the hallway, but when he opened it, I heard a woman say, "Hi, my name is Taylor. I think I know you." I didn't recognize that name, and my grandpa didn't either, because he told her that he definitely didn't know her. He asked how he could help her, and I heard him open the door wider, and then her quick footsteps as she just ran away. After she left, I came out to ask my grandpa what happened. He told me about the interaction with a puzzled look, and I immediately recognized it as suspicious. We have a Ring doorbell, so we pulled up the video it had taken. It showed a young woman covered in tattoos approaching our yard. As she walks up, she whistles loudly to someone off camera. I watch as my grandpa opens the door and she says that she thinks she knows him. Now, my grandpa is a retired police officer, and tonight he happened to be wearing his t-shirt with the name of our city's police department. When he opened the door wider, she must have noticed his shirt because her eyes widened and she just runs away. I watch as the video shows her holding up her arms crossed in an X as she runs away, and a few seconds later a man crawls out from behind my car parked outside and follows her. Then the woman can be heard whistling again as they walk down the block. My grandpa called the non-emergency police line to report suspicious activity, and 2 officers arrived 15 minutes later to hear out our statements and watch the video. They seemed to agree that these were probably 2 addicts working together, casing out the neighborhood to see which houses they could break into. Since there was no proof of a crime committed, the officers gave us an email to send the video to and left. I can't help but wonder what would have happened if I, a 5'3", 100-pound, 21-year-old young woman, had been the one to answer the door, instead of my grandpa, who was a 6'2", ex-military retired police officer. So, sketchy couple lurking around my neighborhood? Let's not meet. I'm in university right now, but staying with my parents at their house for the summer. I was hanging out with one of my friends and we decided to go to a party. I met this guy around my age, and we were talking and having fun, but it was nothing too serious. Or so I thought. We exchanged phone numbers and we hung out a couple of times, but he became incredibly clingy right from the start, so I decided to distance myself in the hope that he would get the hint and back off. Well, he didn't. When I stopped responding, he sent me over 100 messages, with each message becoming increasingly more aggressive as time went on. Keep in mind, it had been less than 2 weeks since we first met. I finally responded and told him that he needed to chill out. He appeared to calm down a bit after I responded, but then he asked for a phone call. I agreed, and we talked for a while. He told me that he couldn't stop thinking about me, that I was the best thing that ever happened to him, etc. It was just a bunch of stuff that is way too intense to say to someone you barely know. I tried to let him down gently, reminding him that I was only home for the summer and I wasn't looking for anything serious beyond a fling. But this only made him angrier. He started yelling at me, insulting me, calling me a slut, basically a complete 180 from what he had just been saying mere minutes ago. Then, all of a sudden, the phone went silent. After a pause, he said in a quiet voice, "Bitch, you'd better get ready because I'm coming over for you." And then he hung up the phone. This was very frightening because he knew my parents were out of town for the week, and that I was staying at their house, alone. However, he didn't know where my parents' house was because I was always the one driving, and he didn't know my friend either, so I thought he had no way of figuring it out, since again, I'm normally living at school in another state. Regardless, I locked all the doors and shut the blinds just in case. After a while, maybe an hour or so, I fell asleep. When I woke up, I looked at my phone and saw a notification on my lock screen. It was from the Ring app, indicating that there had been movement on my parents' camera. It was him. If you watch the video, you can clearly see something in his hand. When he notices the camera, however, he leaves. I immediately blocked him on everything and reported the incident. I have no idea what he planned to do once he got here. It was terrifying to realize that he had come over when I was asleep and defenseless, and completely unaware of his presence. As I would later find out, he was able to get my address from my phone number. Apparently, he Googled it and it returned my dad's name as the owner of the phone number, along with my parents' address. Since I'm on my parents' phone plan, I guess it shows up that I still live here. This revelation was fucking horrifying, as I never knew my phone number could reveal my home address. I'm still extremely upset that this kind of private information is on the internet for anyone to find, as it is incredibly dangerous that websites will just give this away to anyone. Please learn from my mistakes and do not give anyone your phone number unless you trust them completely. I found out that you can get a free Google Voice number to text and call people, and that number can't be traced back to you so easily. My advice is to use a disposable phone number for anyone you're talking to that you meet informally or online. I still can't sleep at night. Hopefully this never happens to anyone else. It has taken me many years to tell this story out of both fear and embarrassment. I share this today as more than simply therapy for myself, but as a warning to all people. Be careful who you meet on social media. In 2018, my ex-husband and I were at the end of a very tumultuous marriage. He and I had been polyamorous for about 3 years before I met this guy. His name was Jez. I met Jez on OkCupid. I was 28 and he was 42. We hit it off very quickly. After a few weeks of talking, I agreed to meet up with him at a restaurant close to my house. We sat and talked for a few hours before I invited him over to meet my husband. Things went very well, and they seemed to get along, so Jez and I started dating. This guy completely swept me off my feet. Jez was sweet and caring. He enthusiastically listened to every little thing on my mind, engaged and validated me. Over and over again, he absolutely revered me for my strength and wisdom. He practically worshipped me for all that I was, and all I was becoming. He showered me with gifts, flowers, and random good deeds just to make me feel safe, wanted, and cared for. I had never been in a relationship that felt quite like that. It was wonderful. It was as though we had been looking for each other for years. After the first few weeks, he had a meltdown over my polyamorous nature. He, quote, pulled the plug because he said he was already falling for me and couldn't handle sharing me. I stood my ground and accepted this boundary, and the fact that I would have to let him go. I left that night sad, but confident that I had done the right thing for both of us. That next week, he sent me flowers and a card to my workplace, begging for another chance and reassuring me that he would rather try than not and end up regretting it. Even though it was scary, he wanted to take this journey with me. We continued dating, and it was just as wonderful. Long nights we spent awake talking, sharing, laughing, lovemaking, and planning. We went places and did things that I had always wanted to do. Then, in the deepest, most intimate moments, we would just sit in silence. He would grip my hand to his face in solidarity and astonishment, asking where I've been all this time. Our time together was effortless. We fit together like puzzle pieces. By August of 2018, my marriage had ended, by no fault of Jez's, and by October, my husband had moved out. I was on a lease at the time and knew I couldn't afford a place of my own, so finding a roommate was essential. I had no support system to fall back on, nor did anyone else I know need a place at the time, so Jez offered to move in. Even then, I was hesitant. We had only been together about 4 months, and I knew everything always changes when you move in with a partner. Despite my hesitation, I agreed. He was wonderful to me. How bad could it be? I was not prepared for the change that was to come. It was literally like night and day. Jez suddenly became a different person. He was extremely controlling, jealous, and lazy. Nothing like the person I thought I had met. And the way he treated me progressively got worse and worse. Hanging out with friends became a burden, if not impossible, because he would blow up my phone, guilting me about leaving him alone or not involving him in some way. Yet, when I tried to, it was also treated as a burden and inconvenience, as he would huff and puff his way through even the concept of leaving space for anyone but ourselves. In December of 2018, we attended my work Christmas party. I had given him the option whether he wanted to go or not. It was really neither here nor there for me, especially because I had already learned that he really didn't do well if he felt pressured into social situations. I opened the invitation to him because he had expressed to me over and over that it was important for him that he was involved in my social life. For the full month he knew about it, he insisted that he wasn't going. I took it as him being introverted and didn't push the issue. I let him know that I would make sure he felt welcome if he did decide to go, but not to feel obligated. I was surprised when he changed his mind at the last minute and insisted on going, and even more stunned when we went and he actively acted as though he didn't want to be there. Everyone there was incredibly welcoming and included him in festivities and conversation. However, he practically grumbled the entire night about the whole thing, mumbling insults and critiquing every little part of the party under his breath, as though being there was absolutely awful to have to endure. No one really seemed to notice the low whispering insults and gripes. At one point, after a couple of glasses of wine, my direct manager leaned into Jez and started praising him. She and I were very close, therefore she was intimately familiar with what I had gone through with my ex-husband. "I am so happy she has you," she bleated through wine happy. "You've been absolutely transformative for her. It's so nice to see her finally happy and appreciated." Without missing a beat, Jez grimaced at the comment and quickly snapped back, "You don't fucking know me." I honestly didn't believe my ears. It was one of those moments where time stops, and you just know you couldn't have heard that correctly. I sat brewing on it for a minute before another lighthearted interaction with Jez prompted him to suddenly snap at me through grit teeth, "Stop it." This triggered me and I lost it. I pulled him outside and asked him what his problem was. I called out his behavior and told him that if he was going to act that way, then he could just leave. That if he didn't want to be there, he should have stayed home. He ended up giving a sort of half-assed apology, and we went back inside and finished the party. I remember the drive home that night, staring out the dark window at nothing in particular, in worried silence. I might have messed up. That was my only thought the entire drive. This all started out slow, of course, like waving me away or invalidating my experiences and ideas due to my age, that I was just dramatizing my experiences because I was young, etc. The man who, not 6 months prior, had validated me, my trauma, and experiences to the ends of the earth. Now every time I started a story or tried to share anything, even trying to plan out meals for the week, he would openly show annoyance as though I was violating his time and attention. Before I knew it, he was snapping at me over every little thing. If I asked how his day was or talked about my day, he would aggressively shut it down. "Why do you always ask me that? I don't want to talk shop at home. I really don't care about your work. It's work." Before I knew it, I couldn't even bring him a plate of breakfast without being snapped at. It was though he was testing me. When Jez and I first started dating, he flat out refused to talk about most of all of his exes. He refused to name them or discuss any of the issues or lessons learned. They, quote, didn't matter, he would claim. They weren't in his life, quote, for a reason. It was the same reasoning he also used in reference to most of my recent exes. Talking about them, including my now ex-husband, may as well have become off-limits. Anytime I brought up either of our exes, he would become incredibly agitated, belittling, and just overall very aggressive. I took this as both an age gap issue, as I have a tendency to dwell, as well as insecurity and a threat to the life he was trying to build. However, after he moved in and this hot-button topic had been established, several times he would bring up his exes and how they looked, telling me on more than one occasion he, quote, would have never dated me back in the day, and that I was, quote, lucky he lowered his standards. I didn't even really know what to say to this. I would just laugh it off and shove it in my back pocket. Noted. He then started bringing up my looks and accused me of catfishing him. I had stopped taking care of myself due to the isolation and had also put on some weight, so most of my clothes that I had once felt great in no longer fit. And since Jez had also been dishonest with me about his financial position, he was also needing extra money here and there, leaving me broke almost all of the time. A horrible tragedy happened that following summer while Jez and I were together. I received notice that a good friend I went to art school with shot himself in the head while tripping on LSD. Our whole class was devastated. He was, without contest, the best photographer of our class and one of the most kind-hearted individuals I had ever had the pleasure of knowing. Also, as someone who is very familiar with LSD, I was rocked. Jez, however, was far from supportive. He pretty much immediately shrugged it off. That's life. I guess that's what he gets for fucking around with LSD. I was baffled at such an unsympathetic response, and even more later when Jez started to interrogate me about my relationship with this guy, asking when the last time it was I had even talked to this friend. You don't even know this guy anymore. Who cares? I broke up with him the first time after he called me at work raging. I was busy, so I wasn't able to answer right away, but once I was finally able to answer, I was met with intense anger. It was storming, and one of my dogs was having an anxiety attack due to the storm and separation anxiety. This wasn't the first time, and he was well aware of what she needed in those moments. Why the fuck aren't you answering my calls? You answer when I call you. I don't care where you are. He went on for a few minutes, calling me a shitty girlfriend and laying into me over my sudden distance and lack of communication while I was at work. At this point, I was done and I had lost it. I tore into him over everything, especially causing problems for me at work. That being in my life is a privilege, and if he's going to wake up every day acting like he hates me, then I don't know what on earth he's even doing with me. I told him that I expected him to get his things and leave. He was always threatening to go back to his old roommates where there was still room. I didn't want him there when I got home, and we could coordinate times for him to come and get the rest. He flat refused, suddenly victimizing himself, claiming he had nowhere to go. How dare you make me fall in love with you? How dare you take me to meet your father and then dump me? My manager and her husband ended up following me home that evening because she was concerned for my safety and had offered to let me stay with her for a few days. I will never forget the scene I walked into. My boss stood next to me, watching as this 42-year-old man crawled on his knees before me, begging for mercy and communication, at one point wrapping his arms around my leg, crying into them. "I can't believe this is happening. She's the love of my life, you know that?" he cried to my boss. I couldn't believe what I was witnessing. This was the antithesis of the heartless person I had been spending my days with. I shook him off and went to the back of the house, gathering enough of my things to get me through the next few days, as well as any other valuables I could think of. It took a few days, but after about a week, Jez started blowing up my phone, apology after apology. Suddenly, he was the man I met again, full of humility and self-awareness. He acknowledged the awful way he had treated me and sent me walls and walls of well-thought-out messages, psychoanalyzing his own behavior, where it comes from, and the ways he knows it needs to change. I took him back. Like a dumb, desperate girl, I took him back. It wasn't long into the second round that he started to guilt me over the breakup. My panic had damaged his relationship with the people in my life, and he made sure that I knew it was my responsibility to fix it. It wasn't long after this that my car ended up breaking down at a gas station close to home. There was a very nice couple in the vehicle next to me that came to my rescue and checked things out under my hood. The gentleman turned out to be a mechanic for a living, so he had a pretty good theory about what could potentially be going on. By this time, I had already attempted to contact Jez to let him know what was going on and where I was. It wasn't long till he got off of work, so he told me to sit tight and would be there shortly. Meanwhile, this sweet couple stayed and kept me company while I waited. Jez barreled in about 15 minutes later, completely ignoring the couple that had helped me. Touching base, the gentleman handed me a slip of paper with a name and a phone number on it, reviewing what he thought was going on with my car. That was before Jez butted in, cutting him off, saying, "I said she's fine." I could see the woman out of the corner of my eyes slink away at this comment and get into the passenger seat of the car. I could feel the sudden tension, like maybe she's been here before. The gentleman didn't move and shifted his attention to me as Jez walked into the store. I could see he was clearly concerned. "Are you okay?" he asked in a low, almost whisper. "You don't have to answer that, but if you need anything..." He looked down at the number in my hand and nodded to it. Seriously. With that, he got into the driver's seat of his car and drove away. I've thought about that couple countless times since that night. Everything went right back to the way it was before, as though the initial breakup never even happened. The same eggshells, the same belittling. If anything, it was worse, because I had permanently damaged our relationship. If I had just, quote, not been so dramatic, if I didn't, quote, run away from everything, then maybe he wouldn't have to work so hard for respect in my life. One night we got into an argument. I don't even remember what it was about, but I had to be up early the next morning for work, so I paused the argument in order to get some sleep. When I went to lay down, I heard the TV turn on. I have a sound bar, so the volume can get pretty loud. Jez proceeded to turn the volume up and up and up, far past any volume I had ever pushed those same speakers to, even for parties. The very walls were reverberating with the sound of the TV at astronomical volumes. Jez then started laughing hysterically. It was a laughter manic with anger, as though something might be funny on TV, but he might also jump out of a window right now. I remember laying in bed absolutely horrified at what was happening. I knew things had gotten bad, but now I was scared. I got out of bed and asked him to turn it down, to which he responded, scoffing, "I'll watch TV if I fucking want to," and turned it up even louder. I felt like I was in a horror movie. I started crying at this point, begging him to please just let me sleep. He started mocking me and calling me names for crying. "Oh, wah, poor baby is crying again. That's your card, isn't it? Crying?" This caused the fight to start again, and he started screaming at me, followed me to my bedroom where he suddenly punched a door not 2 inches from my head. His eyes were black, and he looked at me in the eye, sending the clear, unsympathetic, and hostile message that that was a warning and next time he wouldn't miss. My whole system had shut down at this point, and I sunk to the floor in a panic attack. My ex-husband had issues with violence. Jez knew that. All our rentals prior to that one had holes in walls and doors peppered throughout our unit due to my ex-husband's inability to handle his emotions. But he never hit me, or even came close to it. I crumpled to the ground feeling powerless, trapped and afraid. As my thoughts continued to race, he continued to berate and mock my panicked state. Most of our argument from that night was a blur, but ended abruptly once he threatened to put my social security number on the dark web. At this point, all that was left in me was to fight. I blacked out and went ballistic, screaming at him to get out. I felt rabid and dangerous as I screamed like a banshee for him to leave my home. It was over, and I was ending it that second. I contacted my landlord and explained what had been going on. Jez would also end up contacting her, weaving his own little tale that I was moving out and tried to have the lease transferred into his name. Luckily, since I was several steps ahead of him, my landlord didn't fall for it and contacted me immediately. She personally came and changed my locks for me, gave me the personal contact of a police officer close by in case he showed up again, and took half off my rent for the next month. I am forever grateful to her for these simple acts of kindness that were above and beyond anything I would ever expect from a landlord. It took weeks for him to stop messaging me. The only reason I didn't block him was out of fear that he would show up at my house. Though I had contacts for protection, I knew that I would rather get a daily apology video than have to deal with him on my doorstep. So they persisted, for a while anyway. The same act from before. The love bombing, the promises, grasping at straws trying to find the weak spot where I would let him back in. But I ignored it. It continued for weeks before he finally gave up. He bowed out gracefully, stating boldly that he will always love me. I left him on red. The illusion was destroyed. It took me several years to pick up the pieces. If my divorce wasn't enough, this definitely made me lose trust in myself. I still don't understand what the endgame was. In one of our last discussions, I asked him desperately, what happened to the guy I fell in love with? Jez looked me dead in the eye, smirked, and said, "That guy doesn't exist. I told you what I had to tell you in order to get you away from that fucking asshole husband of yours. You're just stupid and fell for it. Jez, let's not ever meet again." Every day I walk home from school with my friend because she lives only a little bit away from me, so our routes line up. At the start of the school year, we noticed there was a man usually looking at us from his window while we walked home from school. We found it a little weird, but ultimately didn't think much of it. A few months ago, after the heat of summer died down a bit, he started sitting out on his porch when we were walking by. Usually he would just smile at us. Sometimes I smiled back, but I usually just ignored him. One day, as I was walking by his house, he waved to me from where he was sitting. I stopped and waved back at him and told him to have a nice afternoon as I walked past. It felt a little weird because he didn't reply, but eventually I forgot about the whole thing. Once my mother was at work and I was alone at our house, I noticed him walking past my house several times through my window. I felt very creeped out and uncomfortable from it. I considered talking to my parents about it just in case, but I ultimately convinced myself he wasn't doing anything wrong, so it didn't really matter. Yesterday, I walked home from school alone because I stayed behind with some other kids outside the school for a few hours since we had art club that day, and I didn't want to walk home just to have to come back fairly soon after. I had just bought myself a nice pair of wired headphones a few weeks ago with the money I'd been saving up for a long time since I don't have a job. I was playing them over one ear as I was walking home. On the way home, there is a public lot with a stable on it that I like to cut through to get into my yard as quick as I can, rather than walking around the property. Sometimes people like to hang around it to meet up, but there wasn't anyone that I could see this time. As I rounded a corner on the stables, someone grabbed the back of my shirt. From the way they were grabbing it, I could see part of their hand. I jerked forward and they grabbed the top part of my headphones. The wire was at the bottom part of my neck and it got stuck for a moment. I remember feeling like if I couldn't get away now, something very bad was going to happen. The wire eventually snapped and I took off running as fast as I could, screaming. They let go of my shirt and I hopped the half-length fence to our property. I ran as fast as I could out onto the sidewalk in front of my house because I was worried that I would take too long on the lock if they were following me. By the time I actually got to the sidewalk point, I was crying and I felt like I was going to collapse because I was so scared. When I looked over my shoulder, I couldn't see anyone, but I kept running until I reached my friend's house in case whoever was there was still around. When I got there, I was in tears, and it took a bit to explain the situation because they couldn't understand me. They tried calling my mother, but she wouldn't pick up the phone. My friend's mom called the police, and they came to check things out. There was nobody at the stables, and they told me that it was most likely some kid trying to mess around with me, but they escorted me home to where my mother was, waiting for me always. I didn't tell them about the old man because I was worried they would think I was crazy considering he hadn't technically done anything, but there's something in my mind that keeps telling me that it was him who grabbed me at the stables. When I was walking home from school today, I brought a screwdriver with me in case I needed to defend myself. I also had my friend with me. My mother offered to pick me up from school, but I was worried that if I had shown how the encounter had affected me, then it would make things worse. I also made sure to avoid the stables from then on, and my friend made sure I made it to the door. The guy on his porch wasn't there today, and I'm still not fully sure if it was him or not. I feel terrible that my headphones broke, but I can't help but wonder what would have happened if they didn't. This happened years ago when I was barely 14. My middle school and the middle school of my best friend at the time organized a trip abroad to Great Britain, London to be exact. It was supposed to be a few days looking at London attractions, museums, and shops. It was fun, until it wasn't. For the day we were supposed to leave and go home, we were brought to some streets with some interesting shops, and we received free time for shopping. Then, our teachers and guide had a brilliant idea. They told us that after the time for shopping ends, we have to meet at a different street than this. In retrospect, it was only 100 meters away, but they still shouldn't do something like that. Most of us have never been to London. We barely speak English, we don't have a map to the city, roaming services don't work correctly. It was just a bad idea. 90% of the students got lost. I got lost with my best friend because we went in a complete opposite direction. We were both confused about the directions we were given. We were walking along pavement and my friend was running ahead, and I was staying behind, too nervous to look around. We didn't look like we were together because we were not interacting with each other. I guess that's why this happened. Like I said, my friend ran ahead and stopped to look around when I saw a black car approach me and match my speed. I started to feel like this was a scene from a movie. It was broad daylight and there was a lot of people around and no one reacted. I was confused and didn't know what was happening. Then from a car stepped a man and said, "You're nice, come with me," and then tried to grab me. The car was still running, so I suppose someone was still in it. I was stunned. I did not believe it was real. At that moment, my friend ran to me from behind, grabbed me and dragged me away. We ran and tried to lose tail of the man or the car because it followed us. After some time, we stopped and my friend nervously cried, shaking me and screaming why I didn't move when the man tried to catch me. I explained my deer in headlights moment. We cooled down and managed to ask some people for help, and we finally were found by our teachers. We didn't tell anyone what had happened as we were sure no one would believe us. After that, when we got back, I told my parents and I never went on a trip organized by that school again. My mom considered all of that really unprofessional and irresponsible. I just read another story on here about somebody having an encounter and their dog possibly saving their life, and it reminded me of my own story with my pup. I rescued a pit bull from a neglectful family. She was skin and bones when she came home and extremely submissive. After a week of love, affection, and food, she was the most amazing dog I have ever met. The softest, cuddliest baby who wouldn't even play fight with me unless she was under a blanket and didn't know it was me. I needed to do a quick late-night run to my local shop. There's a 40-minute round-trip route on main roads with houses, or a 15-minute round-trip route through an alleyway that wraps around the back of a school field. This alleyway has no street lamps, but I hadn't ever heard of anything bad happening, so I didn't really think anything of it. So I set out with my dog in tow. Just before we reached the entrance, she stood still as a rock. I gently tried to usher her to follow me, but she refused. When I took my headphones off, I realized that she was softly growling and that I could hear a group of male voices coming from the alley. They soon came close enough to where I could see them, and I think that there was around 5 or 6 of them. This was during COVID, so they were all wearing masks with their hoods up. My mom always told me that if I found myself in a situation like this, to not act scared. Being scared shows that you're an easy target. With that in mind, I tugged firmly on my dog's lead to get her to follow me. She stuck to my side, literally pressing her body against my leg as I walked. She was quietly growling the whole time. The men had stopped and were standing slightly off the path to one side at this point. They were talking quietly amongst themselves as we walked by. I couldn't really hear much as my heartbeat was pounding in my ears and my gut was screaming at me. Once I knew I was at the point where the darkness of the alley made me essentially invisible, I heard one of them raise their voice slightly and said, "Nah, that's a pit," in a way that sounded like he was disagreeing. Now, they could have just been discussing the breed of my dog. That's a likely scenario. But the gut feeling I had while walking past, and for the duration of my walk through the alley, makes me believe otherwise. I think that these men were discussing possibly robbing me, or worse. And my soft baby, who was literally scared of her own reflection, deterred them due to being a quote aggressive breed. It's safe to say that we walked the long way home. So, creepy group of men, let's not meet again. I was in grade 9 at a really shitty school. The system there sucked and it was located in a dangerous area of the city I lived in. I actually just remembered this story because it was so usual for things like this to happen there that for me it was just normal, so I forgot it. But looking back at it now, I realized that it's really not normal. So I was in PE class and we were running laps around the school on the sidewalk to stretch. I was with my friend group of 5 girls, and we were walking behind as always because PE for us was talking about the school drama all period. So we were walking and talking about the recent drama when a red truck slowed down beside us. It wasn't unusual. Every time we were walking outside of the school, a creepy man would slow down, so we didn't think anything of it and just kept walking and ignoring him. We saw his truck 2 or 3 more times. He was driving around the school and slowing down every time he passed by us, so we decided to tell our teacher that made us go back inside, in the gym. We started playing whatever game we were doing when the teacher came up to me and told me that I was asked to go to the main office because someone was there to pick me up. I was panicking because no one was supposed to pick me up during class that day, and I thought that maybe something bad happened to either my mom or my dad, or someone in my family. So I got changed into my normal clothes, grabbed my backpack, and rushed to the office. When I got there, the lady told me that there was a man waiting for me outside of the main doors. I got a little confused because usually when my parents came to pick me up, they'd wait in the hall until I got there. I took a look through the glass door and saw an old man. I had never seen this man once in my life. I quickly walked back to the office and told the lady that I didn't know who that was, and what she told me next froze me. She told me that he was a friend of my parents and that they had asked him to come pick me up because my mom got into a car accident. He told the lady my name and my last name, my age, my mom's name, and the grade I was in. I was shocked and immediately asked her if I could call my parents to confirm. So I called my dad, and he told me my mom was just fine, and he was at work. The lady just told me to go back to class, and I never saw that man again. I never knew what happened after I left, and how did he know all of that information about me? My parents talked to some cops about this, and there was never anything of it. We never had answers. Since that happened, I moved to a much safer city, and I hope I'll never see this man again. Hey y'all, this took place the summer of 2022, and I just never thought of writing down this story because I was so stunned that it happened to me at all. So every summer in my city, me and my friends like to make small campfires in chill, secluded areas because we don't want to have to drive an hour to an actual campsite and pay any campsite fee to do so. These also happen pretty spontaneously, so it's a nice last-minute hang to do. There's this one spot near my house that's located by a river that's really nice because no one usually goes there. The only thing to be worried about are bears though, because living in the Pacific Northwest is challenging like that, and my house specifically is located right next to mountains and forest. So one particular night at 11 p.m., I decided to go ahead of my friends and meet them at the spot and set things up early because I wanted us to just be chilling once they got there. The spot I get to has a 2-minute paved walkway I have to go through, and then I have to take a small trail ramping down the right side of a bridge that crosses over the river. Along this paved walkway are 2 lamps located at halfway and another at the start of the bridge / the ramp down to the campfire spot. I park my car at the beginning of the trail on the street and bring my campfire stuff, like flashlight, lighter, small firewood, small shovel to dig out a pit, etc. I get to the spot, and it's a small sandy beach kind of embankment on the side of the river with a small waiting area for toddlers with their families during the hot summers. So I set up the chair and I get to digging the pit with only my flashlight illuminating where I'm digging. I'm also just shoveling the sand right next to me, nowhere near the water, but all of a sudden I hear a loud splash. A splash so loud that it can only come from something equally as large, like a 2-handed rock. I'm confused because I swear I'm not throwing my sand into the water even though I'm only a few feet away. I shine my flashlight at the water and I don't see anything, so I kind of just brush it off, thinking I'm just hearing things. But as I keep shoveling a bit more, I hear another loud splash. At this point, I think something is falling from above because logically something must be falling into the water. I point the flashlight above at some trees, and I don't see anything big enough to make the splash. So as I keep digging, with my heart rate kinda going at this point, I hear a rustling past the arch of where the bridge goes over the river. I quickly grab my light and shine it towards where I hear the rustling. I call out, "Hello?" No response. In my head, if it was a bear, I should be getting out of there immediately, but there was no bear or signs of anything for that matter. So I tell myself I'm just hearing things now, because I've seen horror movies before, and now my mind is playing tricks on me. But I hear the noise again, and it clearly sounds like leaves being rustled, so I shine my flashlight over to the area again, and as I focus my eyes towards the illuminated area, I see the naked back of a man hunched over. I was kind of frozen in anxiety and stress because honestly, of all the things I was to see, I didn't think I'd see the naked back of a man. From the quick analysis my brain could muster up, he looked to be in his mid-40s. He was shaved, not bald, and a medium-ish build, like a mix between chubby and built. As I had my flashlight staying on his back, he started to stand up, and the first thing I noticed was that he wasn't wearing any pants either. My next reflex was to start packing up all of my crap and getting the hell out of there, because now I'm piecing in my head that he must have been the one throwing things into the water to scare or shoo me away. So, after using my reflexive deducting skills, I proceeded to speed walk out of there with all of my stuff. I'm carrying all of my things with me and briskly walk up the small ramp, and I'm on the paved path now out of the forest. I can feel my heart beating in my chest, and I'm frequently looking back to make sure that I'm not being followed. I'm in Crocs, mind you, so I'm hoping that if I have to book it out of there, I'd regret not being in sport mode from the get-go. I make it to the halfway point, and a sense of relief starts setting in, knowing I made it safely out of this very scary situation. But as I check behind me for the final time, I see something. Slowly creeping over the ramp is the naked man crawling on all fours as if he was a primate walking. His head was positioned towards me, looking at me as he made his way to the middle of the paved walkway. He slowly gets up from his stance and starts standing on his feet and positions his body to face me. After setting himself into his new position, the man starts running towards me. I freaking book it. I run as hard as I can down the path. My flashlight jumped out of my pocket and I lost it, but I didn't care because a whole-ass naked man was chasing me at 11 p.m. at night in a secluded forest. I looked back for a split second, and the man was still running towards me, still completely naked. He could have my flashlight for all I care. I just wanted to make it out of this situation alive. I finally make it out of the forest and I run to my car, which is only 30 feet away from the end of the forest. I desperately get to my car, and like a classic horror movie, I fumble with trying to get my key fob to unlock the door. I actually drop my keys and quickly think to myself, I'm literally dead. But I brush the thought off and pick them back up. I get my fob properly, unlock my doors, and throw my things into my back seat before getting into my car. This felt like an eternity, but in hindsight, mostly took like 6 seconds altogether. As I try to guide my key into the ignition, I'm fixated on the end of the paved path that I was just at a few seconds ago, waiting to see if the naked man was coming still. I feel my key go into the ignition, and I switch my sights onto the road in front of me, and I zoom out of the area as fast as possible. As I drive away and I'm a good 30 seconds from the location of the horror that just took place, I get a call on my phone. It was my friends calling me if I had made it to the spot yet, and all I say to them is, "Guys, do I have a crazy story to tell you?" They pull up to my house because, again, it was actually decently close to the campfire area, and I tell them the whole story the way I just told it now. They swear that it was none of them trying to prank me or anything like that, and I also knew that none of them would try to full sprint at me with their dong out. But as we're just talking out in front of my house, there's a college student who looks like he's walking home that's going towards the direction of where I encountered the naked man. I just yelled out to him, "Yo, be careful. There's a naked guy that was chasing me by the bridge that crosses over the river." He responds saying, "Oh damn, really? I gotta go over that bridge to get home." All I tell him is, "Good luck, man." The next day I reported it to the police by phone, but they sent over an actual officer so I could tell them in person and show them where in the area I saw these things. When we went to see where I initially saw the man's back hunched over, they said they didn't see any trace of anyone being there previously, but the officers said that they would make a note of it anyway in case it happens again. Some of my friends said it was a skinwalker. Others say more realistically it's either a homeless, mentally ill, or a drunk or high person. One theory I've heard my friends say is that it's a future version of me pulling a prank on a past version of me, because honestly, if time travel is real, I would totally screw with my younger self like that. I used to be employed as a child protection worker. A report came through about a stepfather who was being abusive to his children. I was given the investigation by my team leader. When I interviewed the oldest child with the police, she had very visible physical injuries and told me exactly what had happened. I'll spare the details, but it was horrific. As the children were in his sole care, we knew that they needed to be removed immediately. We sent a team of 2 workers out to the children's school while myself and a colleague called the stepfather into the office. I led the interview and it was horrible. He didn't even try to deny that he had hurt his stepchild, basically saying, "That's my kid. I'll do what I want and you can't stop me." When I served him the paperwork, he absolutely lost his mind. He was swearing and screaming and said, "If we were outside this building right now, I would fucking kill you." We ended up running out of the interview room, pressing our emergency alarm, and I even had to make a police report about the whole thing. It got really messy. The very next day, we had court for the children, and my manager decided I shouldn't attend due to everything that had happened the previous day. My colleague who did attend told me that this man was at court and yelled several times something to the effect of, "Where is that of a worker who took my kids?" I remember feeling a little freaked out, but it's not uncommon to hear things similar to this when you have to remove a child. It's understandable that emotions are very high. You build a bit of resilience working in this field, and overall I mainly felt relieved that those children had been placed with an aunt and were safe. About 2 weeks later, I had to stay back late at the office on an unrelated job. It was about 9 p.m. when I finished, and I was the only person there. I walked out the back of the building to my car. It was really dark, but when I got close, I thought I saw a shadow moving at the front of my car. Just for a second, and then it was gone. I was about 20 meters away at this point, but it startled me. I stood there for a second just looking at my car, wondering if I was just being paranoid. While staring into the darkness, I started hearing tiny rustling noises, and whether imagined or not, all of the true crime horror stories I've ever heard flashed into my mind. Safe to say, I freaked myself out and sprinted back to the building. I called my boyfriend to come pick me up, explaining what had happened. By the time he drove up to the front doors, I had convinced myself I was being silly and asked him to drive me around to my car. He circled around, and with the headlights shining on my car, I could very clearly see that all 4 of my tires had been slashed. I was an absolute mess that night and called the police immediately. I was pretty sure that this man was responsible, but as I hadn't seen him, I couldn't say for sure. I took a few days off and came back to a meeting with my manager, who had put together a safety plan for me and the other staff. She had organized to have a security guard escort us to our cars and said very clearly that no one was to stay in the building after hours alone. Then, about a week later, a letter was delivered to the office addressed to me. Any mail that comes into the office goes through our reception staff first. Our lovely receptionist opened it, and it was a note that said, "You're as good as dead, bitch." The words were typed and printed. She was an older woman and burst into tears when she read it. It didn't say who had sent it, but I was convinced it was the same man. Over the next few weeks, letters kept coming, each one getting longer. They addressed me as quote bitch and quote homewrecker, saying that I kidnap and abuse children. It was just horrible, horrible stuff. The threats in the letters were the worst. The person writing them threatened to torture, kill, find out where I live, and to burn down the entire building. To be honest, the police were less than helpful. They basically said that given the nature of our work, they couldn't conclusively say it was this man, although they had questioned him. To me, it all seemed like a pretty massive coincidence. I never had anything like this happen to me before. They did say that they were taking the letters very seriously and tracking down where they had been posted from, but I never heard anything back about that. My workplace took the threats very seriously too. All of the security was bumped up across the building, and all staff completed refresher training on emergency management. One day, on the way home from work, I noticed that a car was following me. At first, I thought I was just being paranoid, so I drove down a bunch of little streets. I doubled back onto the same route in a way that would make absolutely no sense. Even after all of that, this dark green Camry was still paced a little way behind me. I freaked out, but had already planned in my head what I was going to do in this situation. I headed straight to the police station, planning to pull right up to the front of the building and beat my horn until I had someone's attention. The second I pulled into the police station, the green Camry drove straight past and disappeared down a nearby side street. I sat there for a good 20 minutes, too scared to get out of the car in case they came back around the corner. It dawned on me that in my panic I had forgotten to get the license plate. That upsets me to this day. I told the police what I knew, but they told me that the man didn't have any car registered in his name. This was the final straw for me. I was a nervous wreck. I was looking around constantly at work and at home. I knew that he lived relatively close to me, so I even stopped going grocery shopping in case I ran into him. I stayed on stress leave for a month and heard from colleagues that the letters kept arriving. I was honestly ready to quit, but then COVID happened. It really changed everything. Everyone went into lockdown and all access to the office was restricted. I started back working from home, driving a work car to and from appointments. I didn't go into the office regularly anymore, only allowed in small working groups when absolutely necessary. Over the next year, the letters slowed and eventually stopped. By the time we were allowed back in the office, there hadn't been any sign of this man for almost 7 months. About a year later, I left child protection. I don't know what happened with those children, but my hope is that they are happy and safe with their family. And as for the man who I believe stalked and threatened me for doing my job, let's not meet ever again. This happened a few years ago around mid-November. My mother and I love being outside and going for walks. This night in particular was freezing, but we decided we wanted to go out for a quick one anyway. As we walked back home, we went down this one street that we used all the time. It's a neighborhood street that leads to the main street, then back into our neighborhood again. We get halfway down the street when I hear a dog bark over the music of my phone. I turn it off and turn to look for the dog because I love dogs and I wasn't aware there was a big dog on the street. I spun around and saw a big dark mass just feet from me. If he stepped 2 more feet, he would have been able to grab me. I immediately felt weird and started speed walking back to my mom, who at that point didn't realize I had stopped. I turned off my phone and whispered to her that I thought that we were being followed. She turned around and grabbed my arm and told me that there was 2 men right behind us. We started walking in a zigzag pattern, and sure enough, they followed our every step. Once they caught on that we knew, one of the dudes started to make small chit-chat with us. "Awfully late for y'all to be walking, huh?" I swear his voice sounded like the definition of the sirens' voices, luring sailors to their doom. He continued asking questions to us. My mom kept walking and replying with quick replies. From the sound of his voice, I knew we were in danger, so I went to dial 911. Instead, my mom told me to call my dad, as he would be able to get to us quicker because we were almost home. We got to the busy street and looked behind us to see them speed walking to us. We decided to risk it and ran into the middle of the street as cars passed on either side of us. We ran across again and met my dad on the other side. We looked back across the street and both men were gone. We got into the car and searched the streets, but these guys had disappeared into what seemed like thin air. I asked my mom if we would have been kidnapped if I hadn't heard the dog. She asked me, what dog? I asked her how she didn't hear this massive dog bark, especially with how good her hearing is. I still have no clue what it was that I heard, but I do know it most likely saved my life. I was in my first semester of university. I had just graduated college not too long ago, and had entered into a program that after a while I would come to resent. During that time, with adjusting and taking daily transit an hour and a half away from where I grew up into the big city in order to study was somewhat of a new adventure to me. In a lot of ways, I was just beginning to sprout as my own individual and trying to carve a path of my life when simultaneously opening up myself to new experiences and a new environment. I have longtime friends who go to the same facility as me, but all the time our schedules wouldn't always line up. This meant that a lot of my days were spent traveling back and forth and walking around the city alone. I really wanted to try and expand my horizon of experiences and friends during this period. In a lot of ways, I was really desiring to find a good community on campus that could help me satiate my boredom and loneliness. I can be extremely extroverted, but sometimes I find it takes a lot of me to try and actually pursue and maintain friendships that haven't been established years prior. I've made friends before from different classes in college, but ultimately, and I know this makes me an asshole, but I would end up texting them less and less until eventually either side would end up ghosting one or the other. Because I'm a busy guy, I don't find myself prioritizing people who I feel like aren't as important to me as others. I know, a shitty thing to say, but nonetheless the truth. One day, however, I met Joel. I was on the phone with my fiancé, and I distinctly remember exactly how it all went down. As I was walking out of the school's Starbucks with a decaf coffee, I had one headphone in, and I was heading to class through a small stretch of underground passageway under the street that connects the school's library building to the actual building that possesses classes. As I was hastily making my way, I saw this short and stout guy, looking roughly my age at the time, which was 21. He had a thick brown beard and a hat on. Our eyes met, and as I was about to simply walk past, he asked me something in a very charismatic and calm tone. "Hey, sorry to bother you. You look like a pretty busy guy, but I was wondering, do you mind doing a survey about religion? It's for one of my classes." To this, I regret answering and wish I had simply continued walking, but at the time, I was becoming more and more compelled by the notion of formal religious institutions and questioning my own religious faith, particularly leaning towards Christianity. "Sure," I replied. He then introduced himself as Joel, and after we went through a small survey pertaining to religious affiliations and perspectives on religions, Joel informed me that a small group of students like himself were planning on getting together as a group and discussing various religions in order to gather new insights and to create a community. Of course, with the prospect of finding some new friends on campus and also exploring my own spiritual perspectives, I gave him my phone number after he asked for it. He said that he would contact me in the next following days. Upon entering our first meeting, I sat down in a very crowded place with seats at our school facility and was greeted by Joel, alongside a bunch of other members. They introduced themselves to me and vice versa, and they were all extremely kind to me. We began our small group meeting, and I was a bit shocked to find out that the sole topic that they were going to discuss was Christianity. I wasn't aware that we were only going to be discussing Christianity, which is against what he had initially proposed this group to constitute upon our meeting in the tunnel. That being said, I was still curious enough to continue, and I was accompanied by 3 other young guys of my age, who after a bit of talking with, I found out we had a lot of similar interests. Joel, who now presented himself as the leader of our study group, relayed how we would be analyzing Christianity through a multi-step program designed to unveil the holy power associated with the religion to us. Since I was curious and wanted to learn more about the religion as well as having made some newfound friends, I continued to attend this, quote, study group for the rest of the semester, in which there were a few circumstances where I questioned Joel's interpretations and was met with hard resistance. It felt like at times my wavering belief in what Joel was saying would be met with straight dismissal as opposed to actual conversation. I continued to brush that off as the group that I was working with got closer. The school's club, which I was now an official part of, provided me with exactly what I had wanted. We even went to a church-run event together where I quit vaping and many individuals reported mystical experiences. Things only started to get concerning with Joel during one of our one-on-one conversations. I discussed my personal experiences and belief in my newfound religious beliefs and all of my former spiritual experiences as well, and Joel exposed me to a story and a few incidents that at the time I certainly should have taken as red flags. For example, when he was younger, he had gone on a retreat where when he was in prayer, he said that he began to hear the voice of God talk to him. I questioned at first if he was referring to the voice of God as more of a metaphor, but he reassured me that he literally heard God speak to him before. When he told me this, I became a bit unnerved. At the helm of this community was Joel, but in all other senses I was satisfied with who I was and what we were doing together. Though I'm not entirely dismissive of strange occurrences, especially pertaining to spirituality, his experience of talking with God in his head came off as uncomfortable to me. He also said that the way that he would pray would involve a direct conversation and reply with God. Out of discomfort, I wouldn't prod him on what that really meant. This, of course, was just the beginning. After the summer had ended, I found myself in the most religiously devoted state I had ever been in. Throughout the summer, I had had a treacherous injury which left me housebound for months and to call upon God in a lot of ways for strength. With my newfound devotion, I was elated to fall back into the community that I had nurtured and grown with throughout the last semester, relating to something that I had found deep joy in. At the first lesson of the semester, something was very different. Joel, as before, was at the helm of our study session, but was now perpetually interrupted by people coming to greet him and give him praise. It was so bad that we literally essentially sat and watched for 20 minutes before we can get on with our lesson as more than 10 people, mostly young men of our age, came to greet this man. As aforementioned, when not unnerving, he was extremely charming and gave the impression that he cared deeply for everyone. Once our lesson began, he introduced us to the second phase of the program. He explained to us that this was one of the toughest programs of the different levels that there were, as it required even more devotion and more importantly an emphasis on sacrifice for those who engaged. He showed us a diagram of a small stick person, and he showed that in this program we would have to accept Jesus as the center of our life. He explained that by making our lives surround Jesus entirely, that we would not be losing something, but be gaining it. He also began to go over the notion that sex before marriage is a sin, and that if we were to continue with this program, we would have to make the sacrifice of giving up sex in our relationships and prove that we weren't. He said that many guys weren't able to continue because of it. I talked about this afterwards with one of the members of the group, who not unlike me, had been in a serious relationship with someone they loved for years. In my personal opinion, though we weren't married on the altar, I knew that both me and this other member felt devoted to our partners as if we were already married in a sense, and we both expressed how Joel's behavior surrounding this was off-putting, controlling, and intrusive. After our lesson, I was a bit dumbfounded by the intensity of which he gave his speech about the new program that we would be engaging in this semester. Joel and I sat down for a few more minutes and talked, in which I expressed experiences of devotion from the summer and explained my entire catastrophic experience with my injury. He then went on to tell me that at times, he was actually able to know things beforehand. This seemingly random and strange statement shocked me. He said, for example, he was able to know something another member had before they even mentioned it, and in the way that he described it, it sounded like he was saying he had some form of mystical foresight. I was a bit jarred to say the least, though. I felt like it would be impolite to question any further. Joel then went on to tell me that he believed that I, if successfully completed this program, was primed to become a teacher for the first program I had done the semester prior, leading others who would join, and that I had a bright future in the organization. In that moment, with what he had laid down on us in that last lesson, I felt very overwhelmed by his expectations of me. It also became very evident that Joel was not a student at our facility. In fact, he was in his mid-30s and had kids. He was actually just a part of an organization that recruits people to become Christians and missionaries that work on our campus. This means that he actually lied to me when I first met him. He wasn't a student. There was no group talking about various religions, and his whole purpose was to convert me to make me join the organization he was a part of. At this point, school began to pick up a lot, and I was working part-time to help support myself. As I was on the train to head back home the next week, I had forgotten that my second lesson of the program that semester was supposed to happen, so I texted Joel saying, "Hey man, I actually got onto the train and forgot about our lesson. Sorry about that, dude. I'm not going to be able to make it. I also have work later." To which he replied, "Can you get off the train? Try and get here as soon as possible." I was a bit dumbfounded at this question. Since I live an hour and a half away, it wasn't as easy as getting off the train and heading back the opposite direction, and he knew that. He knew that the area that I lived in was remote and a long distance away. I also told him that I had work, which he had plainly disregarded. "No man, unfortunately I can't come. Have a good lesson," I replied, to which he again said, "Come on man, just get off the train and come back." At this point I was annoyed. Not only did I feel like he was commanding me, but that he was also blatantly disregarding the fact that I said no and that I had work that day. I didn't answer him. I talked with my fiancé about how I was starting to feel about the whole ordeal, and how I felt guilty about having feelings of wanting to distance myself from the group, while simultaneously not wanting to lose the community and friends that I had established along the way. My fiancé told me that by the way that Joel was acting, and with regards to the things that he was saying, she was starting to become uncomfortable with the whole situation. I remember sitting in bed thinking about leaving the group, and how the prospect made me feel physically ill. After all, I had been given everything I wanted in the community, except at the helm, which was from a person that was seemingly increasingly controlling and persuasive, and was making me and possibly other members feel more miserable. There was an event the following Friday that was going to be at the church, which was organized by the community. Originally, since many of my friends from the group were going, I intended to go, but alas, I was scheduled by my boss to work that day, so there was no way I was going to be able to attend. I knew that Joel would be insistent upon me coming anyway, so when Joel texted me reminding me that the event was Friday, I told him that I wasn't going to be able to go because I had work. To this he replied and simply said, "What? Bro, no way, you've gotta come. Take work off and find somebody to take your shift. God wants you here." I was expected. He dismissed my decision and also said that I had to be there because God wanted me there, as if he was his mouthpiece. I went on to text him again and inform him, "No, sorry man, I can't do that. I just got a promotion and I have to be there. I hope you guys have a great time anyway." To which he then again replied similarly to what he had before. This was my personal breaking point. He knew the importance of my financial situation, and his dismissal of my personal boundaries, as well as his commanding, made me decide to text him explaining that I was done with the group and that I wanted to pursue my own religious exploration without the group from then on. I felt as if he slowly but surely increasingly controlled me and was trying to take what he could, commanding me as if he was the leader of my life in any way possible. It was even up to him if I could fuck my fiancé or not. He replied with a long paragraph persisting in this sort of overly kind manner that I had to continue with the group and that it was God's will for me to show up to the event even though I was completely unable to. He was certain that this group was meant for me and that God had told him that this was where I was supposed to be. After I responded again telling him to stop and that I would not, he sent me another paragraph of similar length repeating what he would say. No matter what I would say and whenever I would say no, he would overstep my boundaries while maintaining a kind and friendly tone in order to try and push me into submission when I clearly said no. At this point I said I did not want him to talk to me anymore, to which he replied, "Bro, why? Can we meet up? I want you to explain why you don't want to continue, so can we meet up and do that? I can get a better sense and we can try to figure out what we do from here." Even in this, I knew he was trying to elongate his chance at bringing me back into the group and continuing his reign of control. I said I didn't want to, so he asked again. I decided at that moment that I needed to block him, so I did. A semester later, I was walking down the street of my school, and as I walked by a pizza parlor, lo and behold, who came out? Joel walked over to me with one of his friends and said that I was one of his friends to his buddy. I uncomfortably stood there, and his friend went inside for a moment while Joel turned around to look at me and asked with his disarming gentleness, "Did you block me?" I replied yes. He then said, "You should unblock me. That way we can meet up and talk because I really want to know why you left the group." To which I was evidently frustrated, said okay, and went on my way. That night he texted me on my Instagram insisting we meet up again, and I blocked him there too. In short, I'm thankful for my fiancée who is the love of my life. Without her, I'm not sure I would have been strong enough to leave the group and his control. The fact of the matter is that there were other guys in the group who had absolutely nobody. They had nothing, and they were prime targets for this charismatic and controlling freak. There were members of that group who were in higher levels, so to speak, who had done all the programs and who seemed as if they were emaciated. But they had become such restricted fundamentalists that their lives and their openness to new experiences were significantly thwarted. Beware of who you let into your life, and just because somebody is nice to you doesn't mean that they might not have ulterior motives. Also, learn to stand your ground and respect yourself. If you say no, mean it. So Joel, you controlling cult leader, let's not meet again. I'll start this by saying I'm a 29-year-old female from a small town in northern Tennessee. The kind where everyone knows everyone, and the kind where you have to drive 30 minutes to an hour to a job that pays a living wage. So, when my dad started his new job around 9 years ago, he found out he was working at the same place as a friend he knew growing up, Barry. I'll also tell you that I was bullied a lot growing up, so I took compliments as a joke mostly. So, when I first met Barry, he would compliment me and tell me how pretty I was. I was 20 at the time, and I always thanked him for the kind words, even if I didn't believe them. As time went on, the complaints got more intense. He would say that he loved to be with a woman of my size. I always laughed it off and never said anything. This went on at company picnics and holiday parties I went to my dad with for about 4 years. Then I got a job with the same company, in the same department as Barry. Things were okay for the 3 months he trained me. He still complimented me daily, and I thanked him for the compliments. After my training, though, I went to the night shift and only saw him for the 30 minutes of overlap per shift. Then, 7 months into the job, my boyfriend and I broke up. Barry was sympathetic at first, then became a different person. His compliments became more focused on my body and not my face. He would stare at certain body parts while speaking to me and cock his head to the side while standing behind me if I bent down to pick something up. As a woman in a prominently male work environment, I was used to being stared at, but this was excessive. When I became single, he would ask me about my sexual history, my preferences in the bedroom, if I'd be with a man of his age, or a man of his size, which was about 5 foot, and he was over 300 pounds. He'd become frustrated when I told him no. Declining everything he asked me never stopped him, though. He just upped his game. He started talking about me and my body to other people at work and asking them questions about me, or trying to get them to ask me questions he wanted answers to. He did this numerous times to my best friend, who we'll call Jay for privacy reasons. Well, luckily for me, Jay just so happened to have a massive crush on me. He never did anything Barry asked of him, and he always told me everything Barry said or asked. This continued on for about another 8 months, and then Barry came to the night shift, so my 30 minutes with him became 8 hours. He would start telling me all about his sexual history, unprompted. The questions, comments, and staring never stopped. To give you all a small example, this man asked me if he had won the lottery, would I sleep with him for money. I said no, of course. He offered me $1,000 one time to have sex with him, and I still said no. I told him there was no amount of money in the world that would make me sleep with him. He got mad at that. He asked for nude pictures, which I still said no to. He'd asked Jay to try to sleep with me and take pictures and videos, and he'd also say no. This all led to me being consistently stressed out and always looking over my shoulder to see if he was staring at me when I had to bend over to pick something up or if I had to reach for something. I'm a very petite woman, and all my work clothes at the time were about 2 sizes too large, so you couldn't see my body shape at all. I did that to try to make him stop staring though, but it didn't matter. He still did. I stopped talking to him completely. I stopped being in his vicinity, but he continued to pursue. His comments were just to other people in the building, mainly Jay. It came to a breaking point one week when my supervisor told me that my department had to work one weekend, alone, just Barry and myself on our shift. I ended up begging him not to make me come in. I told him I would call out and take a point, or whatever I had to do. I told him how scared I was to be alone with that man. I ended up saying no man should be alone in a building this size with a woman, period. He actually listened and canceled the overtime. He made sure I was never alone with Barry without a third person around either. I finally broke down and told HR about it all, but that turned out to be a waste of time. It continued for 6 more months, but thankfully I was on medical leave for surgery for 2 of those months. Then, in November of last year, the right person on my shift heard me crying and complaining to Jay about everything before going home one night, and they complained to HR on my behalf. HR finally opened an investigation. They asked me a ton of questions, and my answers filled up 2 notebook pages front and back of just the comments and questions from him over 3 years. They asked Jay a ton of questions too, as well as a few other people who had worked around us, and 3 days later, he was finally let go for harassment. He threatened me the day that they put him on suspension for the investigation, and he was banned from the company property unless he wanted to be arrested. I filed a no-contact order against him, and I haven't heard from him in over a year. Jay finally told me that Barry had admitted to him at one point shortly before he was let go that if he ever got me alone, he was going to me and do ungodly things to me and just leave my body somewhere. So I'm extremely grateful to my supervisor for not letting that happen to me. I had to type this out twice to get my thoughts in order, but the thing that bothers me the most about it all is that Barry had a daughter, a year younger than me, and she had nothing to do with him when I knew him. I can't help but wonder what abuse he possibly put her through growing up. It has been over a year since this all came to an end. I'm no longer scared at work, I'm no longer on edge or stressed out, and I'm not living in those baggy-ass clothes anymore. But as long as Barry is living and breathing in my hometown, I will not live there. And he's made a lot of enemies in that small town because of this. That happens in small towns when your parents know everyone, including the sheriff. Oh, and about Jay, his massive crush paid off and we're now dating. I've never felt safer with anyone in my life. So Barry, the pervert who made my work life hell for 3 years, let's never meet again. And to any other girl or woman who is being harassed at work, do not be afraid to speak up. I promise you it's worth it to tell someone. When I was about 9 or 10, I was invited to a classmate's birthday party at some swimming baths. All of us were about the same age. It was a small class of about 20 kids, and I'm pretty sure everyone was invited. Just to clarify, I'm a boy. Anyway, I kind of got separated from everyone, and it was just me and this girl alone. I wasn't particularly close friends with her, but I did know her as she was in my class. To describe the location we were in, it was in a tunnel that connected the main wave pool to a lazy river. There wasn't really anybody else there, just me and her, when suddenly she lunged at me without warning. She grabbed my head and held it underwater. I was a pretty skinny kid, and she was bigger than me and a bit of a tomboy. As about 20 seconds went by, I continued to furiously try and kick myself free, but she wasn't letting go. Fight or flight and mass panic took over, and I eventually fought my way free. I was coughing and spluttering water as I emerged. I remembered looking at her and being just in shock. I think I began to ask why she did that when she lunged at me again. She again held my head underwater for what felt like a lifetime before I finally fought my way free again. Both times I genuinely thought I was going to drown, and she didn't let up. I had to fight my way free. I couldn't swim at this time, but the water in the lazy river and tunnel was just about chest high. I began to backpedal away from her. She was giggling as if she thought it was funny, and had this kind of crazed look and grin on her face. I couldn't just climb out to escape, as it was a tunnel, so I had to try and get out of there. As I was backpedaling, she was following me, and I made sure to keep my distance so she didn't lunge again, but she was gaining on me. I actually managed to reason with her as I was so scared of her, I was babbling at her. I tried to distract her by suggesting we go down a water slide together. It worked as I could see her thinking about it, and she stopped chasing me. I managed to exit the tunnel in water, and she slowly followed me but seemed a bit unsure. I immediately felt more safe as I was out of the water and could see other people about as we headed towards the slides. I kept talking all the way up about how fun the slides were, etc., but she didn't really speak at all and had this really strange look on her face the full time. Anyway, after we went down the slides, I caught up with my friends and just stuck with them the rest of the time as I was a bit shook up. I never told the parents or my friends about it as I was a bit embarrassed to admit a girl had tried to drown me and was worried I'd get teased. Anyway, fast forward to adulthood, this girl turned out to be a lesbian. Not that there's anything wrong with that, but she got with her partner who had 2 or 3 kids from her previous relationship with a guy. It turns out that they would torture the kids together and eventually they killed one of them. She is currently serving a life sentence in prison. I told my friends about the swimming pool incident after hearing about her crimes, and I'm pretty sure they think I was just bullshitting as none of them took me seriously. Maybe it was because I kind of lightheartedly said I was almost her victim number 1. However, nonetheless, it is a bit crazy to think back as she obviously was a genuine psychopath. And if I had never fought her off of me to try and escape and then convinced her to go down the slide, I genuinely believe that she could have killed me. Just some quick background here. I'm a 28-year-old female and I'm a dog walker / pet sitter. Some of the dogs that I walk have reactivity, as did this one dog, a pit lab mix. She used to be a really bad puller, along with being incredibly reactive to other dogs on leash as soon as she'd see them. Though through lots of hard work and training with her, she's come a long way with her reactivity to the point it really isn't an issue anymore, even when other owners' carelessness allows their dog to get too close for comfort. On this one walk, she was a dream the whole time. She passed multiple dogs without any issue. She would just look at me for her treat she knew she'd get if she was good. We turned down a side street that looked completely vacant at the time, so I could give her some more relaxed walking time, and all went well for a while. Not a soul in sight, until there was. While I'm usually very good at keeping my head on a swivel, as some of my walks are not in the safest parts of the city, this guy took me by surprise. I don't know how he did it, but he got about 2 or 3 feet behind us without my dog or me knowing he was even there, and all of a sudden shouted something unintelligibly. I could only make out the last 2 words though. Your dog. Immediately, my dog, with no prior history of human reactivity, got between us and started growling, snapping, and lunging aggressively at this man. I'm a smaller woman at 5'3", and I'd guess this guy was about 6'7" at the very least, and incredibly muscular. As soon as he saw my dog trying to attack him, and me struggling to hold her back, he threw his arms up and bolted across the street without another word, disappearing shortly after around a corner. I've never praised a dog for reactivity until that moment. I gave her all the treats I had left in my pocket, and I took her home and told her owner what had just happened and how her dog might have just saved my life. Of course, I hope I'm wrong and that the guy was just slow with social cues, but neither the dog nor I got that impression. Needless to say, she's by far my favorite client dog. I go on walks with her still every week, but we haven't gone down that street again while there's no people about. I'm beyond blessed to have her and get to walk with her weekly, but I do hope I never meet the "your dog" guy ever again. Back in 2016, I was a homeless and drug-addicted teen living in one of the worst skid rows in North America. The majority of my days were spent doing anything I could to get my fix, and then using in a park frequented by other vagrants and addicts, just trying to get by during the thick of the opioid epidemic. Most of these people were harmless, friendly even, except this one young man. He seemed normal at first, quiet and mild-mannered, but every so often I'd catch him glaring, and his eyes were dark and almost empty, like a shark's. The hairs on the back of my neck would stand up, and I got a really weird feeling in my stomach that something was off with this guy. One day, he got into a fight with another kid in the park, and I caught the first glimpse of the monster inside him he was so desperately trying to hide. Fights are never pretty, and I've seen my fair share of them living on the streets, but the rage that exploded from this guy in a mostly verbal brawl was something I'd never witnessed in my entire life. Even in a haze, I could sense there was something terribly wrong going on in this man's head. A few months passed, and by then I found a place to rest my head indoors and was watching the evening news. Turns out my quote gut feeling about this guy was right. He had gone to a neighboring city, stolen booze and a large knife, walked into a high school and ended up murdering a young girl and seriously injuring another. For a while, my mind went through a lot of what-ifs and felt some guilt for not having gone to the authorities with my suspicions. In hindsight, there wasn't really anything I could have told the cops about him besides the off-putting vibe that he gave off, and something tells me they wouldn't have taken a junkie's word seriously anyway. Scary murderer from the park, if you ever get paroled, let's not meet. This story happened 3 years ago, around the time that COVID started, so it was a while back, but still worthy of a post. It was early 2020 and I had just gotten a new job in a small town near my area. While looking for a place to live, my sister offered to rent her house to me. She had bought the house 2 years prior, but she and her husband didn't really take to it, and their commute to work was long, so they moved out and the house was uninhabited. Luckily for me, it was actually pretty close to my workplace, around a 40-minute drive, and my sister pretty much rented it to me for free. I just paid for the water and electricity and looked after the house. I was living there for a solid 2 or 3 months and had already gotten used to it. One night after coming back from work and parking my car, as I walked towards my door, I noticed something odd. There was a cigarette butt on the curb to my house. I leaned down and picked it up, thinking that it might have been mine since I'm a smoker, but after looking at the brand name, I realized it wasn't mine and just threw it away. I didn't think much of it and just shrugged it off as some asshole throwing it at my curb. I went on with my night and nothing unusual happened. 2 days later, I was once again walking to my house when I spotted a few more cigarette butts, this time near my porch. Needless to say, I was pissed off and thought that someone sat on my porch and smoked, but since I didn't know who it was, there was nothing I could really do about it. I noticed that they were put out pretty recently though, so whoever it was probably walked off as I was approaching. That night I was watching a movie on my laptop and it was pretty late, probably past 1 a.m. So I was surprised when I heard a car passing by. It was a suburban neighborhood, and it was COVID, so people rarely ventured out at night, but I didn't think much of it either. Around half an hour later, I was surprised when I heard chattering nearby. I listened intently, but I couldn't hear what they were talking about as their voices seemed almost muffled and quiet. By this point, I was getting a bit unnerved, so I stopped the movie and quietly got off my sofa and walked to the front door to make sure that it was locked. As I was approaching the door, I froze mid-step as I heard the two coming up to my porch and reducing their talking to a whisper. I realized right away that whoever this was wanted to break in. I leaned against my front door and waited, expecting a loud bang against the door or the doorknob to be shaken, but it was oddly quiet. I decided to walk over to my window to see if they had walked away or changed their mind. My windows have bars from the inside out that you have to unlock so that you can move to the curtains or look out the windows comfortably. I slowly unlocked the bar mechanism and lifted it up. I moved the curtains and was taken aback. Leaning up against my window was a man. He was as startled as I was because he basically stuttered over his own steps as he jumped back. He tightened his hoodie to cover his face, so all I could really see was his big blue eyes staring at me. His friend realized what was going on and right away started to kick the door in. He kicked it a solid 4 or 5 times, but the door wouldn't budge. All the while, I was staring at them, frozen in fear and trying to comprehend the situation. I snapped out of it and slammed the bars over my window, locking them and running up the stairs to the storage room where I pushed a table up to the door and called the cops. As I listened and expected the two to come inside any minute, I heard a loud crash and the bars from the windows being shaken aggressively. When they realized they couldn't get in, one of them let out a long, angry scream that probably woke up half the neighborhood. By the time the cops came, though, they were long gone. The police couldn't find out who it was, but were more active in the neighborhood in the following weeks. Regardless, I wasn't too keen on staying there, so shortly after I moved out. My sister sold the house a few months later, and as far as I know, nothing similar ever happened since. I honestly don't know what they wanted, or why they were so determined to get in. But whoever it was, let's not meet again. I was chatting to a friend and I remember this creepy story from the pandemic. I, a female in my 30s, lived alone. I had no car and no shops nearby. It was around 9 p.m. and I got back from work and realized there was no food in the house, so I ordered a grocery delivery on Uber Eats. I asked them to leave it at the door due to the COVID rules. Later, there was a knock at my door and I saw a tall, skinny guy standing right by it. I shouted through the letterbox to leave it on the floor and back up. He said no and that he had to hand it to me because it had alcohol in it. I hadn't ordered any alcohol, so I told him that he had the wrong order. He claimed that it was correct. I told him sternly to put it on the floor and back up. Again, he refused. Stupidly, as I was tired, I opened the door a crack to tell him to do it due to the COVID rules, and he stepped toward the door and put his hand on the handle. I pulled it shut and shouted to tell him to leave or I was going to report him. He put it down and stepped back. I asked him through the letterbox to back up further. He did, but again when I opened the door he stepped forward. I now always remember the chill down my spine when he said, "Pretty, very pretty," in a low monotone. I noticed that he had his phone out pointed at me and asked what he was doing. He said he had to take a picture, but it was pointed at my face and not at the bag on the floor. I grabbed it and slammed the door shut and locked it. I watched through a crack in the curtains as he stood by the door, pacing back and forth as if he couldn't make up his mind. He knocked again, but I ignored it. I was getting seriously creepy vibes and called my best mate for advice. She told me to report him and not open the door. I shouted out the letterbox for him to leave, but he just stood there. My dog, who is normally the sweetest thing going, had picked up on my anxiety and began barking at the door. He turned and got into his car that was parked across the street from my house. I kept watching for the next 10 or so minutes through my window, but he wouldn't leave. He just sat there. But I figured maybe he was picking another order to take. Suddenly, a message popped up on Uber. He told me he'd forgotten a bag in the car and asked me to come get it. I checked my order and it was all there, so I messaged back saying it wasn't mine. He got insistent, saying he couldn't leave until I picked it up. He was practically begging me to come to the car, saying it wouldn't take a minute and that I could grab it from the passenger side. I lost my shit. I told him that I had heard what he had said, that I knew he was taking a pic of me and not the order, and that I was calling the police. He still said that I had to come get it. The entire time I was on the phone to the police, he was still messaging me, even saying, quote, "The police not come, pick up order and I leave. Why you making it hard?" The police told me someone would be there within 20 minutes and to stay inside with the doors locked. My dog was going nuts, with hackles up and barking. My neighbor's husband, who was 6'4" and built like a brick shed, texted saying he heard a commotion and asked if I was okay. I told him what was going on, and he immediately ran out, shouting at the guy that the driver was a predator and to, quote, "fuck off" before he got fucked up. The delivery guy then peeled out of there, and my neighbors came over to make me a brew and wait for the police. I made a report to both them and Uber, but all I got was an apology from Uber. The police never came back to me. I got a car shortly after and didn't use Uber again until my boyfriend moved in. So, to the creepy predatory Uber driver, let's not meet again. When I was 17, my bedroom had a window looking out at my backyard. The backyard was fenced in, but on the other side of the fence were some woods and a retention pond. I'd never been scared of this before, and kept the blinds open so that when the sun rose in the morning, the natural light would help wake me up. One night, I was up late on my phone with my dog laying in bed next to me. At around 2 a.m., my dog jumped up and started barking at the window. At first, I thought he was just barking at his reflection and told him to stop, but then I realized he was looking at the left side of the window while his reflection was on the right. I couldn't see outside of the window because I had left the lamp on my nightstand. All I could see on the window was the reflection of my bedroom. Not wanting to alert whatever might be out there that I was scared of, I faked a yawn, set my phone aside, and turned off the lamp. I then laid down facing the window, and I swear I saw a set of human eyes looking back at me from the left side of the window. I drink a lot of water at night, so I had an empty bottle on my nightstand. I grabbed it and pretended to realize it was empty. I turned on my lamp and acted like I was going to get water. I went to my parents' room and my dad told me not to worry. We had these motion-activated floodlights and they hadn't turned on, so there was no way anything was out there. I went back to my room and told myself I was just seeing things, and I closed the blinds and turned off my lamp and got some sleep. When I woke up the next morning, I went to take my dog out and decided to check out the pine straw bedding underneath my window. It was visibly disturbed. I did my best to ignore that and remember what my dad said about the floodlights. That worked pretty well, until my dad tested the floodlights later that day and found out the bulbs had burnt out completely. To this day, I keep my blinds closed and my lamp off when I sleep. I don't want to risk anything being able to see me, and if anything is somehow peeking through my window, I want to know it's there. If there was someone at my window that night, let's not meet. I'm posting this from a throwaway. Not sure that it belongs here, but it was pretty harrowing for me. I'm not going to get into the details of this here, but I met a man who was much older than me at 18. He was around 40 or something, maybe a little older, who sexually assaulted me. He seemed to be lying throughout the entire event about what he was actually doing, trying to convince me nothing was happening, and baby-talking me as if I were a child. Obviously, I was fucking hysterical at this. For reference, this happened in a house in the middle of nowhere. It's a long drive out and surrounded by a bunch of forest, and to the back of the house there's a field full of stalks you have to wander through in order to reach the main trail, which opens up onto the side of a lake in a heavy forest. After he was done assaulting me and finally let me go, I launched up from his bed and immediately began searching for my clothes, which he refused to help me find at first. It was 2 a.m. in the late fall and everything was pitch black in the house. I could only feel around the floor, forcing my back to him sometimes. Eventually, he got up from the bed without saying a single word and pulled my underwear out from underneath his bed, where he had hid it along with my phone and bra. That always gets to me when I think about that, the fact that he hid them. I thanked him profusely and stole away what clothes I could find along the floor, then hurried to the kitchen so that I could dress there with my back facing the front door. While I was getting dressed, he followed me out and stood naked a few paces away from me, just watching me change. First, he tried to gaslight me and tell me nothing had happened, that I was overreacting and panicking. Now, at this point, I would have said anything and done anything, so I firmly agreed with whatever he told me, and even told him anything that happened was in fact my fault, wholeheartedly agreeing so I could keep him occupied while talking as long as I was changing into my clothes. I kept feeling like if I let the conversation drop and let us drift into silence, he was gonna hurt me. At some point while I was talking, his face turned completely cold. It was like a switch going off, totally dead eyes. He kept staring at me in utter silence, just watching me with no emotion. And at this point I broke into tears finally, because I was sure he was going to hurt me again, or even kill me, as he had threatened to hurt me before. I asked him through tears if he was mad at me. He didn't say a thing. He just watched me get changed with no emotion on his face. I begged him not to get mad at me. He got hard while I was crying. Finally, when I was changed, he told me to wait where I was. He was leaving the house also and needed to get dressed. I don't know why I waited, but I did. I was rooted with fear. I felt like I should run, but I couldn't. He finally comes back out of his bedroom wearing nothing but a pair of boxers and holding a condom. At this point, I finally bolted. As I said earlier, in order to access the main trail to the house, you need to traverse a small field of stalks, but the ground was slippery and wet there as it was late fall, and it was so dark I couldn't properly see where I was walking without a light. I used the last of my phone battery on a flashlight, getting as close to running as I could without actually running. I was terrified of slipping there. I couldn't shake the horrible thought that if I just stood there for a moment, he was going to come find me and catch me, or pop out from behind me. I made it out of the field and onto the main trail, and luckily there was an older lady there walking her dog by the woods who was able to give me directions to the nearest bus stop. I just tore off in that direction after thanking her. Looking back on it, I wish I had told her what had happened and asked for help. But in the moment, all I wanted to do was get home as soon as possible, and I was completely embarrassed. I was already feeling like I could tell nobody ever about what happened that day. It was a long trail, and my phone died on me at some point, but I was able to see where I was going eventually because the bus stop was lit up by a street lamp. It was perched on some kind of slope that overlooked the trail below. When you stood at the top of that stop looking downwards, the entire trail and forest looked almost pitch black, except for faint outlines in the darkness. You certainly couldn't see a person in the shadow. The bus that would take me home came in 30 minutes. The bus that would take me in the wrong direction came in 15. There was a digital clock counting down the time, as most bus stops have in my country. At some point, maybe about 7 minutes before the bus in the wrong direction would have arrived, I heard a man yelling in the darkness. He kept yelling, and like I said, this was 2 a.m., so there was nobody else outside. As far as I knew, I was completely alone, except for that woman I had passed who I left much, much further down the hill. It's common to have drunks in the area, so I thought it could have been nothing, but I crouched in the corner of the bus stop, which was a really horrible place to hide, and tried to make myself as small as possible anyway. I was still shaking and kind of silently weeping from what had just happened. I'm glad I crouched. The shouts became clearer and transformed into my name. At this point I was crying and praying, begging for any bus to arrive, while this man continued shouting my name in the darkness below, searching for me. Nothing else happened, luckily. The shouting stayed on the trail below, and I stayed crouched at that bus stop until the soonest bus arrived, in the wrong direction. I burst into fresh tears again as soon as I was on the bus. I'm sure I looked like I was on drugs, but nobody questioned me or said anything. I eventually made it home safely with a bit of a detour. So, to the rapist who followed me through the dark at 2 a.m., looking for me for God knows what, let's not meet again.